It was a typical bustling afternoon in downtown San Francisco when Elon Musk, dressed in a shabby jacket, worn-out jeans, and a beanie, walked into one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, the kind where celebrities and tech moguls are regulars, and the decor screams luxury. He could feel the eyes on him the moment he entered. People turned their heads. A quick glance at the door showed the host's eyes narrowing as he looked at the unkempt figure standing in front of him. Elon adjusted his jacket, trying his best to blend in. "Can I help you?" the host asked, his tone cold and dismissive. Elon nodded, feeling the heat of his disguise, and hesitated for a moment. This was it, the test he'd been waiting for. The host looked him over once more, clearly confused about whether he should just ask him to leave or let him sit down. A tense silence hung in the air. "What will it be?" the host finally asked, barely hiding his impatience. "Just a seat for now," Elon replied, his voice intentionally rough, almost as if he'd just woken up from sleeping on the streets. As he was led to a table at the farthest corner of the restaurant, he couldn't help but observe the curious glances of the well-dressed patrons around him. Some of them whispered, some stared, but most avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable. The tension was palpable. What would happen next? Would they treat him differently if they knew who he really was? Elon, however, wasn't there to find out about the quality of the food or to savor an expensive meal. No, he was here to learn something far more valuable. He was here to test human nature. What do you think? Would you treat someone differently based on their appearance? Let us know in the comments. Elon Musk had always been an enigma, even to those who thought they knew him best. On the outside, he was a genius, a tech visionary who built rockets, electric cars, and dreams for a future in which humanity colonized Mars. But behind the headlines, there was a side of Elon that few understood, one that had nothing to do with SpaceX or Tesla. It was a side that carried a quiet, unspoken loneliness. Elon had grown up in South Africa, a child of divorce, with a fierce hunger for knowledge that separated him from most of his peers. He often retreated into books, seeking solace in the worlds they created. But that retreat came with its own set of challenges. He was never quite part of the popular crowd. He wasn't athletic or outgoing, and his accent made him stick out like a sore thumb. It wasn't until he moved to Canada, and later the United States, that he started to feel like he could carve out his own identity. But that didn't mean it was easy. In the years that followed, as Elon's businesses grew, so did the sense of isolation. People saw him as the tech genius, and not much else. They revered him for his wealth and innovations, but they didn't see the human being behind the headlines. There were moments when he longed for something simple, a conversation with someone who wasn't interested in what he could do for them or how much money he had. He had friends, of course, but even his closest friends often found themselves enamored by his success, rather than truly understanding the person he was. His family relationships were complicated, too. His parents, while supportive in their own ways, didn't always understand the sacrifices he made for his work. One of his most profound realizations came on a late-night flight to New York, as he sat quietly in a private jet, staring out the window at the flickering lights below. He realized that in the race to build his empire, he had forgotten how to connect with others on a human level. He'd forgotten how to just be with people. No titles, no tech mogul persona, just raw, honest interaction. That's when the idea first came to him. What would it be like to live as an ordinary person, to experience the world as someone without power, without influence, without the resources to buy anything they wanted? He wasn't talking about slumming it for a day to garner some sympathy. He wanted to understand what it truly felt like to be overlooked, dismissed, and treated as invisible. For once, he wouldn't be Elon Musk, billionaire tech mogul. He would be just another person, blending into the crowd, trying to survive in a world that didn't care who he was. His decision to disguise himself as a homeless man was not born from a desire to test people's kindness alone. It was deeper than that. Elon needed to reconnect with the world on a fundamental level, to strip away the layers of fame and fortune and experience life through the eyes of someone who didn't have those luxuries. There was another driving force behind this experiment, a subtle, quiet fear of losing his humanity. Elon knew that if he kept living in his high-tech bubble, surrounded by the ultra-wealthy, it would only become harder to relate to those who weren't as fortunate. The more successful he became, the more distant he felt from the world he grew up in. But this experiment, this disguise, would allow him to feel what others felt. It was his way of testing not just the world around him, but himself. Could he still empathize with others when he wasn't the one being admired? Could he still find purpose in a world where he wasn't the center of attention? On the day of his planned visit to the restaurant, Elon had already taken the necessary steps to prepare. He had hired a makeup artist to create a convincing look, complete with dirt-smudged skin, ragged clothes, and a beard that hid his clean-shaven face. He practiced the walk, the slouch, the aura of a person beaten down by life's circumstances. The transformation was complete, but as he stood in front of the mirror, looking at his reflection, he felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation. He knew this would be uncomfortable, but that was the point. He wasn't just testing the restaurant. He was testing himself. His thoughts were interrupted by his assistant, who reminded him that the reservation had been made. "You're all set, Mr. Musk," she said, her voice filled with the usual efficiency. "Thanks," Elon replied, but he wasn't focused on her words. He was already thinking about what was to come. Walking out of the hotel and blending into the streets of San Francisco, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. This wasn't just about seeing how a restaurant would treat a homeless person. It was about discovering something he had lost, the ability to connect with humanity in its rawest form. As he neared the restaurant, a sense of nervous excitement gripped him. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for, the place where everything would change. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, unsure of what lay ahead. As Elon sat down at the far corner of the upscale restaurant, he could feel the eyes of the room on him. They weren't the admiring glances he was used to. These were skeptical, dismissive, and filled with curiosity. The restaurant had an aura of exclusivity, and those who frequented it were often people who knew the value of appearances, how to look the part, how to act the part. But here he was, blending into the background as a scruffy, unshaven man in threadbare clothes. The host had led him to his table without any real acknowledgement, and now he was left to observe the world he was once a part of, but now from a completely different perspective. He sat, staring out the window, watching as the well-dressed diners laughed, chatted, and clinked glasses. The hum of the conversation around him was filled with words he could barely make sense of. Stocks, launches, acquisitions, the world he knew, the one where his name was synonymous with success, was far removed from this reality. His heart began to race. Was this how people like him were treated? He had expected to feel something different, perhaps a deeper understanding of what it was like to be poor, to be disregarded. Instead, what he felt was a strange sense of alienation, as though he were a ghost in his own world. "Excuse me, sir." A waiter finally approached his table, his tone polite but distant, as though Elon's very presence was a disturbance. "Can I help you with something?" Elon glanced up, surprised. The waiter looked at him as though he wasn't even a person, but a problem to be solved. His eyes scanned the table briefly before returning to Elon's face, still unsure whether to engage further. "I'll just have a menu," Elon replied, trying to mask the irritation he felt. He was being treated like an inconvenience, a far cry from the respect and attention he usually commanded. The waiter didn't respond, instead turning on his heel and walking away without a second glance. The sting of being ignored made Elon shift in his seat. Was this what it felt like to be invisible? To be someone who didn't matter in the eyes of society? The minutes passed slowly, and Elon's mind began to race. It wasn't just the waitstaff that seemed to be distancing themselves from him. The diners, too, appeared to regard him as nothing more than a transient, someone who didn't belong. A woman at a nearby table looked him up and down, wrinkling her nose in disdain before returning to her conversation with a friend. The judgment was unmistakable. Elon's fingers drummed on the edge of the table. He had to admit, this wasn't as easy as he thought it would be. There was an uncomfortable truth beginning to settle in his stomach. The world was quick to judge. He'd known this, of course, but experiencing it firsthand was an entirely different matter. How could a place like this, filled with high-end brands and so-called refined people, be so dismissive of someone who, in reality, was no different from the next person? He had the money, the influence, the social capital. Yet here he was, rejected by the very society he had helped shape. A part of him wanted to get up and leave, but he couldn't. This was the moment he had to endure. This was the test, and he had come too far to back down now. Just as he began to sink deeper into his thoughts, a familiar voice broke through the silence. A well-dressed man had approached his table, a smile that was too polished to be genuine plastered on his face. Elon knew immediately that he was about to be offered a typical kindness that came from pity, not understanding. "Hey, man," the man said in a tone that was oddly casual, as if he were addressing a street performer or a beggar. "Are you okay? You need anything?" Elon looked up at him, surprised by the sudden intrusion. The man was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with a chiseled jaw and a tailored suit that made him look like he belonged on the cover of a magazine. His gaze flickered from Elon's unkempt appearance to the empty plate on the table, then back to his eyes, with a look that conveyed a mix of curiosity and mild sympathy. "I'm fine," Elon replied, keeping his voice steady. "I'm just waiting." The man nodded slowly, the smile faltering. "Right. Well, I just wanted to check in. Don't be afraid to ask if you need something. It's not easy out there, huh?" His voice was laced with a tone that felt rehearsed, like he had said the same thing countless times to people on the streets. Elon could feel the dissonance between the man's words and his actual intentions. This wasn't empathy. It was the sort of pity that felt condescending. He wanted to push back, to challenge him on it, but he held back. He had come here to learn, not to create a spectacle. The man turned to leave, but before he did, he added, "Good luck, man. Hope things turn around for you." Then he walked away, disappearing into the crowd of dinner guests. Elon sat back in his chair, trying to make sense of the interaction. Was this the type of kindness people showed when they didn't expect anything in return? Or was it just another form of judgment, masked under the guise of benevolence? He couldn't help but wonder if this kind of behavior was rooted in a deeper truth. People are most comfortable helping those they see as worthy of help. People like him, who had wealth, power, or status, were treated with respect and dignity, while those who didn't were often met with judgment, pity, or neglect. But Elon's thoughts were interrupted again, this time by the arrival of the food. It wasn't long before the waiter set down a plain plate of salad in front of him. No fanfare, no recognition, just the cold, indifferent presentation of what was on offer. The first bite of the salad was bland, tasteless. Elon chewed slowly, trying to focus on the crunch of the lettuce, but his mind was elsewhere. He wasn't hungry, at least not for food. His thoughts were consumed with the treatment he had received so far. The pity, the judgment, the coldness. The restaurant, despite its opulence, had a certain chill to it. It wasn't just the air conditioning. It was the atmosphere, a sense of superiority that clung to every conversation, every clink of silverware. It made him uncomfortable. He had come here to test something, perhaps the boundaries of human decency, but all he felt now was alienation. Was this really how people viewed those without status, wealth, or power? Was this how the world treated those who had fallen from grace? He couldn't help but think of all the people in the world who experienced this kind of treatment every single day. The ones who walked into places like this, but were never allowed to be seen. The homeless, the poor, the struggling, those who existed on the fringes of society. In some ways, they were invisible. Their lives were invisible. And as Elon sat there, a man who could change the world with a single tweet or a new venture, he realized how fragile his own sense of worth was. No one had recognized him. No one had cared. Even when he tried to be someone other than Elon Musk, the billionaire tech mogul, they still saw nothing but a man who didn't belong. His disguise had worked too well, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of his own humanity. There was no shield, no armor of success to protect him. It was just him, alone at a table in a fancy restaurant, a stranger in a world that didn't know him. As the minutes dragged on, Elon's sense of discomfort grew. The atmosphere of the restaurant, the whispers, the glances, it all began to weigh heavily on him. His chest tightened. This wasn't just about a test. This wasn't just about discovering how people would treat him. This was a painful realization that hit him harder than anything he had anticipated. Status doesn't just define how others treat you. It defines how you see yourself. Elon had always known that wealth and success could warp a person's perception, but now he was facing the raw truth of it. Without the trappings of success, without the name Elon Musk attached to him, he was just a man. A man who could easily be dismissed, ignored, or worse, judged for things beyond his control. It made him realize that he had spent so much of his life defining himself through the lens of his achievements, his inventions, his businesses. But who was he, really, when those things were stripped away? His mind raced. This is a test. This is what it feels like for so many. But it's not just about the food, or the stares, or even the pity. It was about what lay beneath all of that. The fear, the anxiety, the pain of being disregarded by a society that prized status above all else. He could feel it now, more deeply than ever before. The sting of not being seen for who you truly were. As he sat there, feeling more and more exposed, a new thought emerged. This isn't just a lesson for the world around me. This is a lesson for me. It wasn't enough to test how people treated him. The real test was in how he would handle it. Could he remain grounded in who he was when the world around him was unwilling to look beyond the surface? Could he maintain his sense of dignity, his sense of self-worth, when he wasn't the one being admired or respected? It was clear now that his experiment was far from over. It had only just begun. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice from behind him. A woman in her early 30s, elegantly dressed, had approached his table. Her eyes darted to the empty chair across from him before settling on his face with an expression of mild curiosity. Elon couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. This might be different. "Excuse me," she began, her voice polite but cautious. "I couldn't help but notice you sitting here alone. Are you okay?" Elon looked up at her, surprised by the directness in her approach. She wasn't looking at him like the others had, like he was invisible. She was looking at him with genuine concern, though there was still a hint of uncertainty in her eyes, as if she wasn't sure how to navigate the situation. "I'm fine," Elon replied, trying to keep his voice even. He hadn't expected anyone to approach him so openly. "Just enjoying some quiet time." The woman smiled, though her eyes showed a trace of hesitation. "Well, if you ever need anything, or just want to talk, I'm here." She paused for a moment. "It's hard, sometimes, isn't it? To just exist in a world that doesn't always see you for who you are." Elon blinked, taken aback by the depth of her words. For a moment, he wondered if she had somehow read his mind. The woman had no idea who he was, no idea that he was a man who had built empires. She was speaking to him as though he were just another person, lost in the world. Her compassion, though fleeting, felt like a breath of fresh air. "I appreciate that," Elon said, his voice softening. "Really?" The woman gave a small, knowing nod before excusing herself. As she walked away, Elon couldn't help but think about what she had said. It's hard, sometimes, to just exist. She had hit the nail on the head. He wasn't just experiencing the discomfort of being treated like an outsider. He was feeling the raw vulnerability of existing without the shield of his fame, his wealth, or his accomplishments. And for the first time in a long time, he understood, really understood, the struggle of people who had to live without the protection of status. It was one thing to imagine it. It was another to feel it. Elon looked down at the salad in front of him again, but the taste had changed. It wasn't just bland anymore. It was a reminder of how fragile the world's perceptions could be, how fragile his own sense of self had become. He took another bite, chewing slowly, knowing that the lesson he was learning was one that would stick with him far longer than any meal ever would. The hours dragged on, and Elon began to feel the weight of the restaurant's atmosphere more acutely. He watched as the world around him continued as usual, business deals being discussed, people laughing and enjoying themselves, others moving around him in the blur of their lives. Yet, for him, everything felt strangely surreal. He was no longer a participant in this world. He was an observer, a shadow among the elite. His disguise had been so effective that it felt like he was disappearing from their reality entirely. A part of him almost wanted to leave, to escape the discomfort that was slowly gnawing away at him. The restaurant was elegant, beautiful even, but it felt suffocating. There was no one who truly saw him. No one who cared about the person behind the disguise. No one who would ask, "How are you really doing?" There was only polite indifference or the occasional glance of pity. But then, something unexpected happened. The door to the restaurant opened with a soft chime, and a man walked in. He was dressed casually, jeans and a t-shirt, not at all the usual attire for a place like this. His hair was unkempt, and he had an air of someone who wasn't used to the rules of high society. The moment he stepped inside, the room seemed to take notice. It wasn't just the unconventional appearance that caught everyone's attention. There was something else, something about the way he carried himself. A quiet confidence that demanded respect without saying a word. He stood in the doorway for a moment, surveying the room, as though weighing his options. Then his eyes landed on Elon. Without hesitation, the man started walking toward him, a purposeful stride that seemed to cut through the layers of superficiality around them. Elon tensed for a moment, unsure of what was about to unfold. Was this another person to look down on him? Or was he about to experience something different? "Mind if I sit down?" the man asked, his voice low but friendly. Elon blinked, surprised by the directness. He hadn't expected anyone to approach him with such ease, not in this place, and certainly not in his current guise. But before he could respond, the man sat down across from him, uninvited yet undeterred. "I'm Tom," he said, offering a handshake. Elon hesitated for only a moment before accepting. Something about Tom felt different, his demeanor more genuine than anyone else he'd encountered so far. "Elon," he replied simply. Tom smiled, leaning back in his chair with an ease that seemed to make the rest of the room fade into the background. "I don't know why I'm sitting here. It's not like I belong in places like this, but I'm just so tired of pretending." Elon felt a strange sense of recognition. Pretending. It was a word that hit him like a thunderclap. In all the years he had lived, he had become so adept at pretending, at playing the role of the powerful, the successful, the untouchable. But here, in this restaurant, he had become something else entirely. He was pretending to be someone he wasn't, just to see how the world would treat him. And in doing so, he realized he was more disconnected than ever from who he truly was. Tom, on the other hand, seemed to have stripped away all the pretenses. He was sitting here, in this exclusive restaurant, and he didn't care about the judgments or expectations of others. There was something raw and authentic about him, something Elon hadn't encountered in a long time. "I know the feeling," Elon said, his voice softer than before. "Sometimes it feels like the more you have, the less you can be yourself." Tom nodded. "Exactly. People expect so much of you when you've got something. They expect you to be perfect, to have it all together. And when you don't, well, they're quick to turn their backs." Elon was stunned. This man, this stranger, had hit the nail on the head. It wasn't just that he felt invisible as a homeless man in the restaurant. It was the weight of the expectations that came with his name, his fortune, and his reputation. People always expected him to be a genius, a visionary, someone who never faltered. But Elon had faltered. He had fallen. And right now, at this table, he wasn't Elon Musk, the billionaire. He was just a man who needed connection, who needed honesty. "I think we all wear masks in one way or another," Elon continued, his voice low. "Some masks are just more obvious than others." Tom gave a thoughtful chuckle. "Yeah, well, I guess we're all trying to figure out who we really are underneath all the nonsense." The conversation between the two men was unlike anything Elon had experienced in years. It wasn't about business or success or the usual trivialities that filled his everyday life. It was about vulnerability, about raw truths that no one ever seemed to talk about. It was a conversation that stripped away the facades and allowed them to speak as equals, both men sharing their doubts, their insecurities, their struggles. For the first time that day, Elon felt seen. Not because of who he was on the outside, but because of who he was on the inside. Tom hadn't recognized him as Elon Musk, and it didn't matter. What mattered was the connection they had forged in that moment. "You know," Tom said after a pause, "I think I'm going to stick around for a bit. I've got a feeling this meal is going to be a lot more interesting than I thought." Elon smiled, the weight of the world lifting slightly off his shoulders. There was no pretension here, no expectations. Just two people sitting at a table, talking about life. As they continued to talk, Elon's mind began to shift. This wasn't just about how the world treated him. This was about how he treated others and how he treated himself. He had spent so much time worrying about appearances, about his reputation, that he had forgotten what it meant to truly connect with someone. Tom's presence, his authenticity, had sparked something in Elon. The restaurant around them, with all its polished glamour, faded into the background. For the first time that day, Elon wasn't pretending. He wasn't playing a role. He was just being. The lesson had arrived, not with grand gestures, but with simple, honest conversation. In a world obsessed with status, appearances, and success, true connection came from vulnerability. True connection came from being real. And as he looked at Tom, who was still talking with passion about his own struggles and dreams, Elon realized that this was the turning point he had been waiting for. This wasn't just a test of how the world treated him. It was a test of how he treated himself, and how he could change the way he connected with others moving forward. The conversation with Tom lingered in Elon's mind long after the meal had ended. As the two men spoke about everything from the pressure of success to the pain of personal failures, something profound began to stir inside of him. For so long, Elon had built his identity around his achievements, his fortune, and the image he had carefully crafted for the world. But the raw honesty in Tom's words, the realness of his struggles, shattered something in Elon. He felt an unfamiliar sense of freedom. It was a freedom that had nothing to do with wealth or power, but with the act of simply existing as he was, flawed, uncertain, human. No longer did he need to wear the mask of invincibility. It was a strange, vulnerable feeling, but in the best way possible. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't pretending. He wasn't chasing perfection. The meal had come to an end, and Elon felt an unexpected weight lift from his chest. Tom had paid for their meal and insisted on leaving a generous tip for the staff, even though it had been a rather quiet and low-key interaction compared to the usual lavish meals Elon was accustomed to. They stood up, and Tom clapped him on the back as they both walked toward the exit. "I'm glad we met, Elon," Tom said, smiling. "Sometimes you meet someone, and you just know the universe had a reason for it." Elon smiled back, though his expression held a depth of reflection. "I feel the same way, Tom. You've given me a lot to think about." As they stepped outside the restaurant into the cool evening air, Elon's mind was swirling. Tom had reminded him of something fundamental that he had forgotten over the years: the importance of real connections. In his world of business deals and innovations, it was easy to lose sight of the people behind the titles, the masks, the facades. But today, for the first time, Elon had been reminded that beneath every surface was a person struggling with something. Suddenly, as he made his way to the side of the building where he had left his belongings, his phone buzzed. Elon pulled it out, expecting to see a message from his assistant, or perhaps a work update. But instead, the screen displayed a news notification. His eyes skimmed the headline, and his stomach churned. Elon Musk allegedly spotted in disguise at high-end restaurant, homeless or just testing the limits of public perception. The article was riddled with speculation, questioning his motives and the authenticity of his actions. The piece claimed he was either engaging in a social experiment or, in the worst case, he was experiencing some kind of breakdown. The comments were filled with ridicule, mixed with curiosity, as people tried to decipher his intentions. Elon stared at the article for a moment, his hand tightening around his phone. A deep, unsettling sensation began to rise within him. The very test he had set out to conduct had now been turned into a spectacle. He had hoped for genuine insight into human nature, but all he had gotten was judgment, assumption, and a media frenzy. He had become the subject of gossip and ridicule instead of the architect of meaningful change. For a fleeting moment, he felt the crushing weight of public perception. Here he was, one of the richest men in the world, being reduced to a sensational headline. He had gone from being Elon Musk, the visionary entrepreneur, to just another curiosity for people to dissect. His vulnerability, his attempt to understand what it was like to be invisible in a world that worshipped wealth and status, was now being misunderstood. It was ironic. He had disguised himself to feel what it was like to be a stranger, to be judged for something other than his name or his wealth. But now, it seemed that no matter how hard he tried, he could never escape the person the world had made him. Whether he was disguised as a homeless man or in the finest suit, he was always going to be Elon Musk, and the world would always see him through that lens. His breath caught in his chest, a sudden surge of emotion welling up from deep within. The anger was immediate, but quickly gave way to a feeling of deep sadness. He had wanted to prove something to the world. He had wanted to show people the humanity that lay beneath the surface. But now, all he could feel was the weight of the expectations the world had of him, the heavy burden of being seen as more than just a person. He stood there for a moment, staring at the screen, his mind racing. Is this how it always is for those who are famous? He asked himself. Does every action, every gesture, become a spectacle? A voice interrupted his thoughts. Everything okay, man? Tom had returned, walking up behind him with a concerned look. You look like you've seen a ghost. Elon shook his head, a bitter smile curling on his lips. Yeah, just a little more than I expected. Tom glanced at the phone in Elon's hand, recognizing the headline before he could even read it. Ah, so it's out now, huh? Elon nodded, feeling a pang of frustration in his chest. I thought I could do something simple, something meaningful, but it's all being twisted. Tom frowned, placing a hand on Elon's shoulder. You can't control how the world reacts, man. People are going to make assumptions, they're going to talk, but that doesn't change what you learned. It doesn't change what this meant for you. Elon took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He looked at the phone one last time, then tucked it back into his pocket. He wasn't sure if he could truly change the way people saw him, but he realized something important. The journey he had taken, the lesson he had learned, wasn't for the public to understand. It was for him. It was about shedding the masks, even if the world didn't want to see what was underneath. I guess you're right, Elon said finally, his voice steady. I can't control how the world sees me, but I can control who I am when no one's looking. Tom smiled, clapping him on the back again. Exactly. And that's the real test. For the first time that day, Elon felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had come into this experiment looking for validation, for understanding, but in the end, he had found something deeper. He had found the courage to face the truth, not just about the world, but about himself. As he and Tom walked off into the night, Elon realized that this experiment wasn't just about how others saw him. It was about how he saw himself. And that was a truth that no headline, no media storm could ever take away. The following days after the public backlash felt like a blur to Elon. The media storm had calmed somewhat, but the damage had already been done. He could no longer go out in public without someone recognizing him or referencing his disguise experiment. Headlines had shifted from judgment to mockery, with a few media outlets speculating that he was going through some sort of midlife crisis. Despite the noise, there was a strange clarity in Elon's mind. He had expected a world-changing insight from his little experiment, but what he had learned was far more personal. He hadn't expected the headlines, but even as they felt like a punch to the gut, Elon knew deep down that he hadn't done this for the world. He had done it for himself. The lessons he learned during that brief period of vulnerability were invaluable, and they had forced him to confront things he had avoided for years. His isolation, his constant pursuit of perfection, and his need for validation. The whirlwind of media attention had forced him to reflect on his place in the world, both as Elon Musk, the billionaire, and as Elon, the man behind the mask. His wealth and fame had long shielded him from the everyday struggles of ordinary people, but in that brief moment of walking in someone else's shoes, he had seen the world from a different perspective. It wasn't just about empathy for the homeless or the downtrodden. It was about understanding how fragile human connection could be, and how easily it could be lost in a world obsessed with status and success. One quiet evening, while reflecting on the events that had unfolded, Elon received a message from Tom. It was a simple text, just a few words, but the timing felt significant. It was as if Tom had known exactly what Elon needed to hear at that moment. I've been thinking about our conversation. You're right. You can't change how the world sees you, but you can change how you see the world. Keep that in mind. Take care, my friend. Elon smiled as he read the message, a sense of gratitude filling him. Tom's words echoed in his mind. He had been so consumed by the world's expectations, the constant push for success and recognition, that he had lost sight of something essential. The ability to find peace within oneself, despite external chaos, was the true power he had been seeking all along. A few days later, while sitting in his office at Tesla, Elon couldn't shake the thought of his experience. His company had seen tremendous growth, but his success felt hollow in comparison to the profound shift that had occurred within him. What good was all the money and the innovation if it didn't lead to deeper connections? What was the point of leading a revolution in technology if he couldn't even connect with people on a human level? He decided, for the first time in years, to take a step back. Elon canceled a series of meetings that had been on his calendar for weeks, instead opting to take time off to reflect. It wasn't an easy decision. His companies were running at full speed, and there was always pressure to be ahead of the curve. But he realized that if he didn't take this time for himself, to process everything that had happened and recalibrate his life's priorities, he would be doing himself and his companies a disservice. As he sat in his office, staring out at the quiet expanse of the Tesla parking lot, Elon began to see things in a new light. There were so many people in the world who would never understand his experiment, who would never grasp the nuances of his disguise or the insight he had hoped to gain. But that was okay. He didn't need their approval. What mattered was that he had learned something invaluable about himself. His true worth was not defined by his wealth or his name. It was defined by his ability to connect with others, to be vulnerable, and to live authentically. He realized that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. It took courage to be vulnerable in a world that prized power and success above all else. And in that vulnerability, Elon discovered a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. That evening, he decided to take a different approach in his public life. He would be more open, more real, with both his employees and the world. He wasn't going to be the perfect figure that the media and the public expected. He was going to be himself, a flawed, ambitious, and evolving human being who had learned the importance of authenticity. Over the next few weeks, Elon made small but significant changes. He started having open conversations with his employees, sharing his personal reflections and vulnerabilities. He began discussing not just the innovations Tesla and SpaceX were working on, but the challenges he faced in balancing his responsibilities with his personal well-being. He didn't hide behind the masks of success or invincibility anymore. And as he did, something remarkable happened. People responded. They respected him more, not because of his success, but because of his honesty. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of doubt, moments when Elon wanted to slip back into his old ways of hiding behind accomplishments. But with each step forward, he felt a growing sense of fulfillment. He was finally living in alignment with his values, no longer seeking external validation but finding his worth within. A few months later, during a TED Talk, Elon spoke candidly about the lessons he had learned through his disguise experiment. He shared how it had forced him to question his own motivations and reconsider what really mattered in life. The talk was met with praise, not for the spectacle of the experiment itself, but for the vulnerability Elon showed. He spoke not as a billionaire CEO, but as a human being who had faced challenges, insecurities, and failures, and had come out stronger for it. The message was clear. Success was not just about innovation or wealth. It was about embracing who you truly were, flaws and all, and connecting with others on a deeper level. Elon had finally found the freedom he had been searching for, not in the form of riches or recognition, but in the simple act of being real with himself and the world around him. As weeks turned into months, Elon found himself living in a new reality. His life had subtly shifted, not from the outside, but from within. The overwhelming sense of urgency that had once driven him, pushing him to achieve more, faster, and with greater spectacle, began to fade. Instead, a quieter, more intentional drive emerged, one rooted in authenticity and connection. He no longer felt the need to prove anything to the world. He had already proved enough to himself. Elon's journey had begun with a seemingly simple experiment, a test to walk in the shoes of someone less fortunate, to see how the world would react to him without his wealth and fame. But in truth, the the experiment had turned out to be far more profound. It was never about testing the world. It was about testing himself. The world hadn't changed, but he had. During this time, Elon took a more active role in giving back to the communities he had once distanced himself from. He focused on the people behind the headlines, the engineers, the workers, the everyday individuals who made up the fabric of society. He used his influence to create platforms for those who had been left behind, just as he once felt left behind in his own struggles. He supported causes that gave a voice to the voiceless and invested in initiatives that sought to reduce inequality. Tesla's work on sustainability and clean energy began to take on a new, deeper meaning for Elon. The goal wasn't just about building profitable technologies. It was about creating a future where people were valued not for their wealth or status, but for their contribution to the world. And as SpaceX expanded its reach into the stars, Elon realized that space exploration, once just a dream, could now be seen as a unifying force for humanity, one that could inspire people to see the world and each other with a renewed sense of wonder and possibility. Through all these changes, Elon continued to be a public figure, but he was no longer consumed by the public's perception of him. He was learning to set boundaries, to prioritize what truly mattered, and to invest in relationships that nurtured his growth as a person. He had become comfortable with the idea that he wasn't perfect, that he didn't need to be, and that true success lay in his ability to embrace both his triumphs and his failures with equal grace. The media eventually moved on from the controversy of his disguise, but the lessons from that chapter of his life remained. Elon Musk, the tech mogul who once seemed untouchable and infallible, had become a more grounded, reflective individual, a man who no longer wore a mask, but who allowed himself to be seen for who he truly was. In a private moment of reflection, Elon took out a journal he had kept throughout the experiment. He had written his thoughts down during those days of walking among the homeless, during the uncomfortable, raw moments of vulnerability. Reading through the pages, he marveled at how far he had come. He had been on a quest for external validation, but now, he realized, the only validation that truly mattered was the one he gave himself. The world would never stop judging him, and that was fine. What mattered was that he had learned to stop judging himself. As he closed the journal, a sense of peace washed over him. He knew that he was on a new path, one that he had carved for himself, not because of the expectations of others, but because of his own evolving understanding of what it meant to live a full and meaningful life. The phone buzzed on his desk. It was a message from his assistant. "Elon, there's a conference call with the SpaceX team in 10 minutes. Elon took a moment before responding. He didn't feel the same urgency he once had. He no longer defined himself by the next deal, the next breakthrough, or the next headline. Instead, he smiled as he thought about the long road ahead, one where the destination mattered less than the journey itself. Elon's transformation wasn't a sudden epiphany. It was gradual. The more he reflected on the lessons he had learned, the more he realized that growth didn't require perfection. For so long, he had chased after unattainable ideals, driven by the pressure to be flawless in the eyes of the world. He had believed that success was defined by the ability to conquer, to outdo others, and to always be ahead. But now, he knew that true success was not about being perfect. It was about being real, about owning both the wins and the losses. For the first time in years, Elon allowed himself to experience the full range of emotions that came with this shift. There were moments of frustration and doubt. His old habits of striving for greatness would creep in, whispering that he hadn't done enough, that he wasn't enough. But with each passing day, he learned to let those thoughts go. They no longer held power over him. He began spending more time with his children, allowing himself to simply be a father without the distractions of work or his public persona. The more time he spent with them, the more he appreciated the simple joys of life. He realized that he had missed out on so much by always being so consumed with his companies and his own ambitions. He hadn't been present enough. Now, he made it a priority to be fully present with his family, to enjoy the small moments, and to learn from them as much as he taught them. Elon also reached out to Tom. Their conversation from the past, those few words of wisdom Tom had shared with him, had stayed with him, and he felt it was time to reconnect. They hadn't spoken in months, but Elon wanted to share his progress, his journey, and the insights he had gained. When Tom answered the phone, his voice was warm and familiar. "Hey, Elon. It's good to hear from you. How are you doing?" Elon smiled, appreciating the genuine interest in his well-being. He didn't need to be anything other than himself in this conversation. "I'm good, Tom," Elon said, his voice tinged with a newfound calm. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. That experiment, well, it was more than just an experiment. It changed something in me. I've been focusing on being more present, on connecting with people in a real way." Tom chuckled. "I knew you'd come around. You're one of the few people who can change the world, Elon. But it's good to see you changing for the better, on your own terms." Elon took a deep breath. "I guess I've realized that the world doesn't need me to be perfect. I don't need to be this larger-than-life figure anymore. I just need to be me, flaws and all." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Tom spoke with quiet conviction. "That's the real victory, Elon. Not the big projects, not the headlines. It's when you can look in the mirror and be okay with the person you see, no matter what the world thinks of you." Elon smiled. "Yeah, I think I'm finally starting to get that." After their conversation, Elon felt a sense of renewal. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He wasn't perfect, and he didn't have to be. He could continue to push boundaries and innovate, but he could do it in a way that was true to himself. There would still be challenges ahead, but now he felt ready to face them. Not as the billionaire mogul the world expected, but as Elon Musk, a man who had learned to embrace both his successes and his imperfections. As time went on, Elon's approach to life, work, and relationships continued to evolve. He no longer sought to be at the center of attention or to prove his worth through achievements. Instead, he focused on building connections with those who shared his vision, inspiring the people around him to be better, not just at what they did, but at being human. The next big milestone for Elon wasn't the next groundbreaking rocket launch or the introduction of a revolutionary product. It was something much more personal. He decided to host a small gathering for his closest friends and colleagues, inviting them into his home, not as the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, but as a man who had come to understand the value of personal connection. As they gathered around the table, sharing stories and laughter, Elon couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. There was no talk of sales numbers or future ventures, just simple conversations about life, challenges, and dreams. He looked around the room at the people who mattered most, people who had stood by him not because of his wealth or status, but because of the person he had become. In that moment, he knew he had found something far more precious than any achievement. A community of people who accepted him for who he was, flaws and all. And as the evening went on, Elon realized that this was the true essence of success. Not accolades, not the endless race to be the best, but the ability to form meaningful relationships and to live in a way that felt authentic to his heart. As Elon sat in his office, looking out at the bustling campus of Tesla, a quiet but profound shift had occurred within him. He had spent so much of his life building companies, conquering challenges, and achieving milestones, driven by the need to prove himself, to show the world that he was capable of changing the future. But now, as he reflected on his journey, he realized that the true measure of success was not how many barriers he could break, but how many people he could help break free from their own limitations. His new perspective brought a fresh sense of purpose. His mission was no longer just to create the next big thing. It was to empower others to think bigger, live fuller lives, and to help them see that they too could achieve greatness. Elon had learned that real change didn't come from sitting atop the mountain, but from bringing others up with you, lifting them through the lessons and struggles that shaped his own path. This realization marked the beginning of a new vision for Elon Musk. He began to reimagine the future of his companies not just in terms of technology and profitability, but in terms of human potential. The innovations he had pioneered in electric vehicles, sustainable energy, and space exploration were revolutionary, but he wanted to take it a step further. He wanted to inspire a global shift in how people viewed their own lives and capabilities. Elon started having candid conversations with his leadership teams at Tesla and SpaceX. He no longer simply expected results. They were now charged with understanding the deeper purpose behind their work. He emphasized that their technologies weren't just about creating products. They were about solving real-world problems, improving lives, and empowering communities. The focus on changing the world evolved from a slogan to a genuine mission. But the changes were not confined to the workplace. Elon began to look at the broader implications of his influence. He thought about the future of education, how the current systems were outdated and often failed to nurture creativity, critical thinking, and emotional intelligence. He started laying the groundwork for a new initiative, one that would revolutionize how children and young adults learned. His idea wasn't to create another online course or a better textbook, but to create an immersive, hands-on, and real-world-based learning experience that would inspire curiosity, problem-solving, and empathy. It was during a meeting with his closest advisors that Elon first vocalized his new dream: a global educational platform that would provide free access to innovative, practical learning experiences, building a generation of thinkers, doers, and changemakers who could tackle the world's toughest problems. Elon's passion for space and the environment still burned bright, but now, he wanted to see that same fire ignited in the next generation of innovators. Education is the key to everything, Elon explained to his team. If we want to solve global challenges, if we want to ensure the sustainability of our planet, if we want to reach Mars, we need a generation that can think beyond the limitations of today. It's not just about training people to work in factories or in tech companies. It's about teaching them how to change the world in every area of life. His team listened intently. There was excitement in the room, but also a sense of uncertainty. Elon knew that what he was proposing wasn't easy. It would take years to develop, a massive reimagining of what education could be, and the resources of multiple industries coming together to make it happen. But he wasn't deterred. He had never been one to back down from a challenge, and this would be no different. In the weeks that followed, Elon began reaching out to educators, innovators, and thought leaders from various fields. He hosted private discussions, attended conferences, and had countless conversations about how to reshape education for the modern world. He wasn't interested in imposing a top-down solution. He wanted to foster collaboration and creativity, encouraging experts from all sectors to contribute their insights and expertise. At the same time, Elon continued to focus on his existing ventures. SpaceX was making strides with its Starship program, bringing humanity closer to the possibility of interplanetary travel. Tesla's mission to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy remained at the forefront, and the company's work on autonomous vehicles was steadily progressing. But now, each of these projects took on new meaning. They weren't just vehicles or rockets. They were tools that could help solve the problems of today and create opportunities for tomorrow. As Elon dove deeper into his new mission, he began to notice subtle changes in himself. He was more patient, more reflective, and less concerned with the constant rush to achieve. He had learned the hard way that life wasn't about keeping up with everyone else. It was about creating something meaningful that could stand the test of time. And in his heart, he felt that this new vision, this focus on human potential and the future of education, was the true legacy he wanted to leave behind. The next few months were filled with strategy sessions, meetings with experts, and endless brainstorming. Slowly, the idea began to take shape. A platform that would offer free access to high-quality, real-world education, combined with opportunities for collaboration and innovation. The goal was simple: to build a generation of thinkers who were as passionate about changing the world as Elon had been when he started his journey. But there were still hurdles to overcome. Creating such a platform required partnerships with tech companies, universities, and educators who shared the vision. It also meant creating an ecosystem that could sustain itself without relying on traditional models of profit and competition. Elon knew this would take time and careful planning, but he was committed to the cause. He had seen the potential for true change, and now it was time to bring that vision to life. As Elon's vision for reshaping education began to take root, he quickly discovered that his most formidable challenge was not technological or financial, it was cultural. The resistance to change in traditional systems, particularly in education, was immense. For years, schools had adhered to methods that prioritized standardized testing, rigid curriculums, and outdated structures. Many people in the field of education had grown comfortable with these methods, and the idea of overhauling them seemed both radical and intimidating. Elon was no stranger to resistance. He had faced skepticism when launching SpaceX, when betting on electric vehicles, and when pursuing his dreams of colonizing Mars. But this was different. Education wasn't just about pushing new technology. It was about shifting mindsets, changing the very foundation of how people learned and interacted with knowledge. The stakes felt higher, and the road seemed much steeper. But Elon was determined to make it happen. He knew that in order to break through this resistance, he would need to enlist the support of forward-thinking educators, innovators, and thought leaders who shared his vision. He spent months meeting with teachers, professors, and even students, asking them what they thought was wrong with the current system and what could be improved. In these conversations, he was struck by the passion and frustration many educators felt. Teachers who wanted to inspire creativity but were restricted by curriculums that stifled imagination, or professors who wanted to make learning more hands-on but were limited by outdated resources and systems. One conversation, in particular, stood out to Elon. He was sitting across from Dr. Abigail James, a well-known education reformer who had spent decades working to change the way schools approach learning. She was passionate about creating environments where students could think critically and solve real-world problems. But she had also seen how entrenched the system was. You can't just give people the tools and expect change to happen overnight, Dr. James told him. You've got to change the culture of education, and that's a monumental task. People are comfortable with the way things are, even if they know it's not working. Change needs to come from within. Elon nodded. He had heard that many times before. He had experienced it with Tesla and SpaceX. People were often resistant to change because it threatened the status quo, and that fear could be powerful. I know it's a big challenge, Elon said, but I believe we can change it. I've seen it happen before, when we put our minds to it. We've changed the way people think about electric cars, about space travel. This can be done, but we need to create a movement. We need to show people that the way we've been doing things isn't the only way. We need to disrupt the system. Dr. James leaned back in her chair, considering his words. After a long pause, she smiled. I think you're right. But you'll need more than just money and resources. You'll need the support of the entire education community, teachers, parents, students, and policymakers. You'll need to convince them that this is a better way forward, not just a different way. Elon knew she was right. The work ahead would be difficult, but he was undeterred. He was used to making the impossible happen, and this was no different. He reached out to a network of educators, activists, and tech innovators to create a coalition dedicated to reforming education from the ground up. Together, they worked to build a prototype of the new platform, one that would offer free access to an alternative curriculum that emphasized creativity, critical thinking, and problem-solving. But the opposition continued. Many school boards rejected his ideas, deeming them impractical or too radical. Politicians, especially those with ties to traditional education systems, dismissed his efforts, wary of the disruption his platform could cause to their vested interests. It became clear that Elon's vision was not going to be embraced by everyone. But he wasn't discouraged. Instead, he saw these challenges as a sign that he was on the right path. He took his message to the public, speaking at conferences, hosting interviews, and leveraging social media to rally support. As he spoke, he shared stories of how traditional education had failed him and many others, and how the world needed a new approach. He emphasized the importance of adapting to the fast-paced, constantly evolving world and how current education systems were falling behind in preparing students for the future. Slowly but surely, his message started to resonate. Parents began to see the value in a curriculum that focused on developing their children's problem-solving skills, while teachers, exhausted by the constraints of standardized testing, found hope in a system that allowed them to focus on fostering creativity and curiosity. Students, tired of being forced to memorize facts and regurgitate information, became excited by the prospect of learning in a way that felt real and applicable to the challenges of tomorrow. One day, Elon received a message from a young teacher named Sarah, who had been following his work and believed in the vision he was championing. She had been working in an inner-city school where resources were scarce, and her students lacked opportunities to explore and create. Sarah's message was simple, but it spoke volumes. I believe in this. I believe in what you're doing. Let's build this together. It was this kind of support that kept Elon moving forward. With each passing day, more and more people joined the movement, teachers, students, and innovators, coming together with a shared vision for a new future of learning. The momentum had begun to build, and while there was still resistance, Elon felt something shift. For the first time, it didn't feel like he was alone in this fight. He had a community of people who believed in what he was doing and who were willing to push against the tide of tradition. Elon knew that there was still a long road ahead. He wasn't going to change the world overnight. But as he saw the passion and excitement of those around him, he realized that the future of education was in capable hands. And if there was one thing he knew for sure, it was that change, no matter how difficult, was always possible. Elon stood in front of a crowd of educators, tech innovators, and policymakers at an international conference in San Francisco. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. His vision for revolutionizing education had been met with resistance from some corners, but this was a new opportunity. An event that brought together some of the brightest minds in education and technology. This was the moment he had been working toward for months, perhaps even years. It was the moment that could change everything. His presentation was simple, yet powerful. He shared the story of his own education, the frustrations he'd experienced, and how it led to his belief that traditional systems were not enough to prepare the next generation for the challenges they would face. As he spoke about the need for creativity, problem-solving, and hands-on learning, he could feel the energy in the room begin to shift. But it wasn't just about the message. Elon had come prepared with something tangible. He unveiled the first prototype of the new educational platform. It wasn't a fully realized system yet, but it was a clear step forward. The platform would provide free access to a variety of courses focused on real-world problem-solving and critical thinking. These courses were designed to complement traditional schooling, not replace it, and would offer students from around the world the chance to engage in collaborative projects, simulations, and hands-on learning experiences. Elon's voice resonated through the room as he explained how the platform would be scalable, accessible, and designed to encourage global collaboration. The platform could be used by anyone, anywhere, whether they were in a small rural town or a bustling metropolis. It was a new kind of education, one that wasn't constrained by geographical borders or traditional systems. This, Elon said, is the future. This is how we will prepare the next generation for a rapidly changing world, by teaching them to think critically, collaborate creatively, and tackle the problems of tomorrow with the tools and mindset they need to succeed. The response was electric. As he finished, there was a brief moment of silence, followed by a wave of applause. Elon had done it. He had sparked something. People were not only listening, they were excited. Educators were nodding, and even the most skeptical policymakers looked intrigued. The vision was starting to take shape, and it was clear that the platform had the potential to become a powerful force for change. But this was only the beginning. After the conference, Elon was approached by several individuals who wanted to be a part of the project. One of the most important conversations came when he met with Dr. David Patel, a renowned educator and proponent of experiential learning. Dr. Patel had spent years working in classrooms, advocating for hands-on, project-based learning that challenged students to think for themselves. He was immediately drawn to Elon's vision for the educational platform. "I've been in this field for decades," Dr. Patel said, "and I've seen countless initiatives come and go. But this has the potential to really change the game. The hands-on, project-based approach you're advocating for is what our schools need. And the fact that it's free and accessible? That's the real breakthrough." Elon and Dr. Patel spent hours discussing how the platform could be expanded and refined. Dr. Patel shared his insights on creating immersive learning experiences that went beyond traditional classroom activities. Together, they began mapping out a strategy to integrate not just tech-driven tools, but also human-centered approaches that would inspire students to become lifelong learners. But Elon knew that the real challenge wasn't going to be the platform itself. It was going to be how to get it into the hands of as many students as possible. While the response from the conference had been overwhelmingly positive, he was acutely aware of the barriers that still existed. There were schools that were entrenched in outdated systems, and there were communities that lacked the resources or infrastructure to implement the new model. How could he reach them? How could he ensure that this platform didn't remain just an idealistic dream, but something that truly impacted millions of young lives? He quickly realized that partnerships with governments, nonprofits, and other educational organizations would be crucial. Elon reached out to local school districts, as well as international education leaders, to discuss how they could collaborate to bring the platform to underserved communities. He proposed pilot programs that would allow schools to test the platform on a small scale and provide feedback on how to make it even better. At the same time, he also worked on expanding the technological infrastructure needed to support such a large-scale initiative. Tesla and SpaceX both played pivotal roles in developing sustainable energy solutions and advanced technology that could be leveraged to create low-cost access to the internet and digital devices in remote regions. As Elon continued to push forward, he began to see glimmers of success. A few districts had already agreed to test the platform, and early reports showed that students were more engaged and excited about learning. Teachers were reporting improvements in creativity, critical thinking, and collaboration among their students. The platform was beginning to show signs of its potential, but there was still a long way to go. One evening, as Elon sat at his desk reviewing the results from the pilot programs, he received a call that would change the course of his work. It was from an education official in a developing country who had been following his efforts. "We've seen the success of the pilot programs in some of the wealthier regions," the official said. "But what if we brought this to our country? What if we could make this accessible to students in rural and underserved areas where access to quality education is limited?" Elon's heart raced. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. The chance to take the platform beyond the borders of the developed world and into places where it could truly make a difference. The prospect of giving children in underserved areas the tools to build a better future, regardless of their circumstances, felt like a turning point. "Let's make it happen," Elon said with conviction. "We can't afford to wait. Education is a global challenge, and we're going to solve it together." As the months passed, Elon Musk's vision for revolutionizing education began to gain more traction. What had once been an ambitious idea had slowly transformed into a global movement, one that was touching the lives of students, teachers, and communities around the world. The educational platform that Elon had launched, designed to foster creativity, critical thinking, and problem-solving, was beginning to show results on a much larger scale. One of the key turning points came when the project expanded into international markets. After discussions with leaders in various countries, Elon's platform was piloted in multiple regions, including developing nations that had limited access to educational resources. It was in these regions that the platform began to make its most significant impact. In rural areas of Africa, where electricity was often unreliable and access to technology was minimal, the platform's ability to run on low-power devices with limited internet connectivity was a game-changer. Elon's team, working closely with local governments and organizations, developed innovative solutions to overcome these barriers. They used solar-powered devices and offline modes to ensure that students could still access lessons even without a constant internet connection. Meanwhile, in South America, where large sections of the population lived in poverty and had limited access to traditional schooling, the platform provided an alternative to an education system that had been underfunded for decades. Students, many of whom had been forced to drop out of school to help support their families, were now able to continue their education and learn at their own pace, regardless of their circumstances. In Asia, particularly in countries like India and Indonesia, where education inequality was a pressing issue, Elon's platform was making waves. The project partnered with local nonprofits and educational organizations to reach remote communities and deliver the resources that were often lacking in traditional school systems. This collaboration between local organizations and Elon's team became a model for other countries to follow. Elon's dedication to providing education for all was being realized in real time. Yet, despite the progress, there were still challenges to overcome. While the platform was becoming widely adopted in many parts of the world, there were still large segments of the population who had yet to benefit from it. As the platform grew, Elon knew that the key to success wasn't just creating a powerful system. It was ensuring that every student, no matter where they lived, had access to it. One key factor that helped the project move forward was Elon's insistence on keeping the platform free for all users. While the financial burden of maintaining and expanding the system was enormous, he knew that charging for access would undermine the very mission he was trying to achieve. With the support of corporate sponsors, government grants, and donations from philanthropists who shared his vision, Elon was able to keep the platform accessible to everyone, no matter their financial status. It wasn't all smooth sailing, though. Some countries had their own agendas and were hesitant to allow an outside entity to influence their education systems. In particular, A few governments in the Middle East and parts of Asia had reservations about the platform, fearing that it would encourage students to challenge traditional norms or question established ideologies. Despite the resistance, Elon remained steadfast in his belief that the platform could foster a better, more inclusive world. He met with government officials in these countries, explaining that the platform wasn't meant to replace traditional education. It was meant to complement and enhance it. His message was simple. Education shouldn't be about rigid systems or ideologies. It should be about opening minds and helping students thrive in a rapidly changing world. His persistence paid off. Slowly but surely, more countries came on board. International organizations like UNESCO and the World Bank took notice and offered their support. With this newfound backing, the platform was able to expand even faster, helping millions of students worldwide. As Elon watched the success of the platform unfold, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just a business venture or a personal project, it was a mission to change the world, one student at a time. The feedback from students and teachers was overwhelmingly positive. Students were more engaged, curious, and motivated to learn. Teachers found that they could focus on fostering creativity and individualized learning instead of just teaching to the test. Parents were thrilled to see their children excited about learning in ways that were previously unimaginable. One of the most powerful moments came when Elon received an email from a teacher in a rural village in Kenya. She wrote about how her students, who had never had access to computers or the internet, were now learning in ways that were once thought impossible. She described how the students worked together on projects, learned about environmental sustainability, and even participated in global conversations with other students from around the world. The platform, she said, had sparked a new sense of hope and possibility in her students. "I never thought I'd see the day when my students could have access to the kind of education you're providing," the teacher wrote. "But now, they're not just learning, they're dreaming. And that's all I could ever ask for." That email was a turning point for Elon. It wasn't just about the technology or the global reach. It was about the lives that were being changed. This was the real impact, and it was only the beginning. But even as the platform gained momentum, Elon knew that the work was far from over. He had always been someone who aimed for the stars, whether he was sending rockets to Mars or reimagining the future of transportation. Now, he was setting his sights on something even greater, ensuring that education was universally accessible and that every student, no matter their background or location, had the opportunity to reach their full potential. Despite the tremendous strides Elon Musk's educational platform had made in revolutionizing global education, it was becoming increasingly clear that the journey to universal access was not without its challenges. As the platform expanded to reach underserved regions and new countries, there were unexpected roadblocks that arose, political, social, and even technological hurdles that threatened to slow its progress. In particular, Elon faced opposition from several established institutions. Traditional education systems, with their rigid frameworks and standardized testing approaches, were not easily adaptable to the platform's new way of thinking. Some schools and governments viewed the platform as a disruption to the status quo, a threat to their authority, or an unnecessary complication. A particular country in Southeast Asia, which had initially shown interest in the platform, backed out at the last minute. The country's Ministry of Education had expressed concerns that the educational content would not align with the country's strict curriculum standards. They were also hesitant about the platform's global approach, fearing it might undermine national education policies and cultural norms. Negotiations with other governments became tense, and Elon quickly realized that he needed to address these concerns head-on. "We need to find a way to collaborate, not to challenge," Elon said during a video call with his team. "This is not about replacing what they have. It's about enhancing it, helping students develop skills that are essential for the future. We can't afford to approach this as an adversary." The first step was to focus on transparency. Elon reached out to educational leaders, government officials, and teachers in the countries that had shown resistance to offer reassurances. He emphasized that the platform was designed to complement, not compete with, existing educational frameworks. The platform wasn't about imposing a particular ideology or methodology. It was about providing students with additional tools to develop critical thinking, creativity, and collaboration skills. But despite Elon's best efforts, not everyone was convinced. Some countries were skeptical of the idea of free online education, especially when the platform didn't promise to solve every problem in the system. They believed that education was an expensive and long-term investment that required extensive planning, resources, and careful governance. A particular issue emerged in a Middle Eastern country where leaders feared the platform could be used to promote democratic values and critical thinking, which they felt might challenge their political structure. The local government sought to impose strict regulations on what content could be shared, which threatened to undermine the core principles of the platform, its openness, freedom, and accessibility. Elon was once again at a crossroads. How could he maintain the integrity of the platform without alienating governments that had the power to limit or block access? Determined not to back down, Elon called for a series of high-level meetings with government leaders. He met with education ministers, local regulators, and cultural leaders. He explained his vision not just for education, but for fostering global understanding and preparing students for the rapidly changing world. During one such meeting, an education minister from the Middle East expressed her concerns. "We understand the benefits of technology, but we cannot compromise our values or traditions. We cannot risk our children being exposed to ideas that conflict with our way of life." Elon listened carefully. He recognized the importance of respecting cultural values, but he also understood that education should not be limited by outdated systems. "What I'm offering," he said, "is an opportunity to help your students understand the world they are part of. It's not about replacing what you already have. It's about adding more opportunities for them to think critically, to solve problems, and to be prepared for the future. But I also believe that education should be about choice. We can work together to make sure the content aligns with your values, but we also need to give students the chance to think for themselves." After days of discussion, the government agreed to a modified partnership. The platform would be integrated with local curriculum requirements, offering students an option to explore additional subjects while respecting the country's cultural standards. The compromise didn't come easily, but it marked a significant victory. It was proof that it was possible to find common ground between technology-driven innovation and deeply rooted traditions. Elon realized that the path to change would not always be linear. It would require patience, negotiation, and, above all, an unwavering belief in the platform's potential to help students worldwide. Despite the success in this instance, other roadblocks were still emerging. Another country had its own set of regulations that made it difficult for any foreign educational content to be distributed freely. And some corporations, particularly those with vested interests in traditional educational publishing, were beginning to push back against the growing influence of Elon's platform. There was pressure from all sides to either slow down or scale back the project. But Elon remained resolute. "Every time we face resistance, we find a way forward," he said during a meeting with his leadership team. The barriers are not obstacles. They're opportunities to show just how powerful this vision really is. Education is not a one-size-fits-all concept. We need to continue pushing for what's best for the students, not just the systems in place. Through these struggles, Elon was reminded of his own experiences in education, the limitations of traditional learning, and how important it was for students to think outside the confines of standard curriculums. The resistance only reinforced his determination to expand the platform further. One evening, as Elon sat in his office reviewing reports from various pilot programs, he received a call from a major international NGO that focused on providing education to conflict zones and refugee communities. They had been closely monitoring the progress of his platform and were eager to partner with him to bring educational access to some of the most vulnerable populations in the world. The NGO had already developed a network of schools in refugee camps in the Middle East and Northern Africa. They believed that Elon's platform, with its flexible, low-cost solutions, could help bridge the educational gap for thousands of displaced children. "We believe this platform can provide hope to those who need it most," the NGO director said. "We want to work with you to ensure that no child is left behind." Elon's heart swelled with pride. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The platform had the potential to reach those who were most in need, children who had been robbed of their futures due to war, poverty, and displacement. This partnership could change lives in ways that no government or institution had ever dreamed of. With renewed energy, Elon and his team set to work. They would overcome the obstacles, find solutions, and ensure that education would be available to all, no matter their background, location, or situation. The partnership with the NGO working in conflict zones was a pivotal moment in the evolution of Elon Musk's educational platform. It marked a shift from a vision of global access to a reality where education could reach the most vulnerable populations in the world. Elon was no longer just trying to disrupt traditional educational models. He was transforming lives, and the impact of this collaboration would extend far beyond classrooms in affluent countries. The first pilot projects in refugee camps in the Middle East and Northern Africa were challenging. The circumstances were difficult. Many of the students had lost everything and were living in conditions far from ideal. But despite these hardships, the students were eager to learn. Their drive and curiosity were a stark reminder of the importance of education, even in the most dire situations. The NGO had already set up temporary learning centers in the camps, but there were few teachers and limited resources. With Elon's platform, they could provide a wealth of educational content, allowing students to access lessons remotely through solar-powered tablets. The platform's offline capabilities meant that the students didn't need constant internet connectivity, only the ability to download lessons when the connection was available. The first success story came from a group of young girls in a refugee camp in Jordan. These girls, who had been displaced by conflict, were often denied an education because of societal norms that restricted their opportunities. However, with the help of the platform, they were able to access lessons on subjects they had never imagined learning. They dove into subjects like mathematics, history, and even coding. The online discussions with students from around the world opened their minds to new possibilities, inspiring them to dream of careers they had never thought possible. We used to think that our lives were set in stone, that we would always be here in the camp, living in the same situation. One of the girls, Yasmin, said in a video shared by the NGO. But now, we know that we can be anything we want to be. The world is much bigger than this camp, and thanks to this education, we can go out and make a difference. Elon watched these videos with mixed emotions, pride, hope, and even a sense of responsibility. He had always believed in the power of education to change lives, but seeing it unfold before his eyes in the form of these young girls made him realize just how far-reaching the platform's potential could be. This was no longer just a business venture or an educational experiment, it was a movement. The success in the refugee camps was a breakthrough moment for the platform. It proved that education could transcend borders, that it could reach people even in the most remote and war-torn regions. And it wasn't just about delivering content. It was about empowering people to change their own futures. With the success of the initial pilot projects, Elon's team doubled down on expanding the program. The partnership with the NGO expanded to new regions, and the platform started being used in displaced communities in Syria, Afghanistan, and other conflict zones. Teachers in these areas, who had long struggled with a lack of resources, were now able to offer a more diverse curriculum and engage students in new ways. But there were still major obstacles to overcome. The region's instability and unpredictability made it difficult to maintain consistent access to technology. Power outages, lack of infrastructure, and even threats of violence meant that the project had to be flexible and adaptable. In many cases, Elon's team had to work with local partners to ensure that solar-powered devices were distributed and maintained. They had to adapt their teaching methods to fit the conditions of these areas, where many children had missed years of formal education. Despite these challenges, Elon's team made significant progress. With the help of local governments, international organizations, and passionate volunteers, they created makeshift schools equipped with solar-powered classrooms where students could access the platform's content. Teachers were trained to help students navigate the online lessons, and in some cases, local leaders took it upon themselves to mentor students and offer additional support. Elon was particularly proud of the way the platform had connected students across the world. While most students were learning from their own communities, they were also participating in international forums where they could share ideas, discuss solutions to global problems, and build relationships with students from other parts of the world. One memorable moment came when a group of students from a refugee camp in Lebanon participated in a virtual debate with students from an elite school in New York. The topic was climate change, and the students from Lebanon shared firsthand experiences of the environmental challenges they faced in their region. The New York students, in turn, discussed innovative technological solutions. The debate was eye-opening for both sides, and it sparked a meaningful exchange of ideas. Sometimes, we think that our problems are unique to us, one student from Lebanon said after the debate. But when we hear other students talking about their challenges, we realize that we're all in this together. We need to find solutions together. That exchange was a perfect example of the power of the platform. It wasn't just about providing access to education. It was about creating a space for dialogue and collaboration where students from different backgrounds could learn from one another and work together toward shared goals. However, Elon knew that despite these successes, the project still had much more to accomplish. The platform's reach was growing, but there were still millions of children who had no access to the education they deserved. Many were living in areas where conflict and instability made it nearly impossible for them to attend school, and even in peaceful regions, education systems were still falling short in many places. As Elon pondered the next steps, he felt both a sense of urgency and hope. This was a long-term mission, and he knew that it would take years, if not decades, to fully realize the potential of the platform. But with every child who gained access to education, with every story of hope and transformation, he knew they were getting closer to their goal. "We've proven that this can work in some of the toughest places on Earth," Elon said during a meeting with his team. "Now it's time to take the next step, bring education to every corner of the world. Every student deserves a chance." And with that, the next phase of the mission began. Elon's team worked tirelessly, focused on expanding the platform even further, making sure it reached the most remote communities and ensuring that no child was left behind. It was clear that this was more than just a technological breakthrough. It was the start of a new era of learning, one where every student had the opportunity to thrive, regardless of their circumstances. The success of Elon Musk's educational platform in conflict zones had ignited a ripple effect across the world. What began as a small initiative to provide displaced children with access to quality education had now expanded into a global movement. Communities, schools, and organizations from all corners of the world were beginning to see the power of education delivered through technology. What was once a disruptive idea was becoming an essential tool in the fight against inequality. Elon's leadership and his unrelenting commitment to the cause had sparked a revolution in education. Governments were beginning to take notice, and businesses were starting to understand the power of aligning themselves with social good. Companies that had once been hesitant about the platform's potential were now offering to sponsor its expansion, seeing the opportunity to contribute to a greater cause. Schools in developed nations, recognizing the platform's effectiveness, were adopting it as a supplementary resource to enhance their curriculums. However, this rapid expansion brought its own set of challenges. The platform's infrastructure had to evolve to meet the increased demand. With millions of students now using the platform, technical issues began to arise. Servers were overwhelmed, and software bugs started to affect the user experience. Elon knew that the platform's success depended on scalability, and he wasn't willing to let technical problems hinder its growth. He called together his engineering team to brainstorm solutions. "We've created something groundbreaking," he said, his voice filled with both urgency and excitement. "But to make it work for everyone, we need to scale it up fast. We need better servers, more efficient software, and a global network that can handle millions of users without delay." The engineers got to work, upgrading the platform's infrastructure to accommodate the new surge of users. They deployed cloud servers across various continents, optimizing the platform's speed and reliability. Elon, always an innovator, suggested integrating AI-driven features that could personalize learning for each student, adapting lessons based on their learning pace and preferences. As the platform's reach continued to grow, its impact became even more visible. In India, the platform's lessons were being used by rural schools in remote areas where access to quality education had been a long-standing challenge. In Latin America, students in small villages were learning alongside peers in major cities, giving them access to the same resources and opportunities. And in Africa, where the lack of educational infrastructure had been a persistent issue, children were learning subjects that were once inaccessible to them, including advanced science, technology, and mathematics. But the success of the platform wasn't just about providing access. It was about giving students the tools to solve the world's most pressing problems. Through the platform, students were not only learning traditional subjects, but also receiving training in problem-solving, innovation, and entrepreneurship. They were taught how to approach global issues like climate change, poverty, and inequality with creativity and a sense of responsibility. One student from Kenya, Amina, shared her story in a viral video. "I used to think that education was just about reading books and passing exams," she said, standing in front of a group of students in her village. "But now I know it's about changing the world. We are the next generation of leaders. We can solve the problems our parents couldn't. Thanks to this platform, I'm learning how to build a better future for all of us." Amina's story, along with many others like it, began to inspire people around the world. The message was clear. Education was no longer a privilege, it was a right, one that should be available to everyone, regardless of where they were born or the circumstances they faced. But even as the platform was reaching new heights of success, Elon knew that the journey was far from over. The dream of universal education was still an ambitious one, and the barriers to achieving it were immense. There were still millions of children living in war zones, millions more who had never set foot in a classroom, and many who faced systemic inequalities that the platform alone couldn't solve. Yet, Elon believed that the platform had laid the groundwork for something far more powerful than just education. It had sparked a movement of global unity. By providing access to knowledge and encouraging collaboration across borders, the platform had become a symbol of hope and progress for people everywhere. In a world divided by conflict, politics, and economic disparities, education was the one thing that could bring people together. One evening, as Elon sat with his leadership team in a video conference, he shared his vision for the future. "We've made incredible progress," he said, "but we have to keep pushing forward. The next step is to make sure that every child has access to a world-class education, regardless of where they live. Our goal isn't just to teach. Our goal is to inspire change in how we think about education, how we think about each other, and how we think about the world." He paused, reflecting on the magnitude of what they had accomplished. This is just the beginning. Education has the power to change the world. And that's exactly what we're doing. The team nodded in agreement, their faces illuminated by the glow of their screens. They knew that there was still much work to be done, but they were more determined than ever to make that vision a reality. In the months that followed, the platform continued to expand, and the world began to see the results of their hard work. Students, teachers, and communities around the globe were sharing success stories of how the platform had transformed their lives. Countries that had once been resistant to technological disruption in education were now embracing it, and international partnerships were being formed to ensure that no one was left behind. The global awakening had begun. As the platform continued its global expansion, Elon Musk and his team were faced with new and unforeseen challenges. The overwhelming success of the initiative had brought both praise and scrutiny, and the rapid pace of growth had begun to expose cracks in the foundation that had once seemed so solid. Though education was being provided to millions, the complexities of scaling a system on such a grand scale were becoming apparent. One of the immediate challenges was the lack of local infrastructure in some of the regions where the platform had been deployed. Despite its offline capabilities, many remote areas still face significant obstacles, such as unreliable electricity, poor internet connectivity, and limited access to devices. For example, in rural areas of India and parts of Southeast Asia, students who were enrolled in the platform were unable to continue their lessons due to power cuts and a lack of compatible devices. Elon had always believed that technology could bridge these gaps, but now, more than ever, he realized how deeply intertwined these issues were with the broader socio-economic realities of the regions he was trying to reach. Simply providing educational content was not enough. In these areas, it was critical to create a system that also addressed the infrastructure deficits that were holding students back. Elon and his team convened a series of urgent strategy meetings. They brainstormed ways to improve the platform's reach without getting bogged down in the inefficiencies of the existing infrastructure. Elon, ever the problem solver, proposed a bold idea. What if they created mobile, solar-powered classrooms that could travel directly to the students in need? "We have the technology, and we have the resources," Elon said, his voice firm with resolve. "We can bring the school to them. Let's create mobile learning units that are fully self-sustaining. They'll have solar panels to generate power, Wi-Fi hotspots for connectivity, and tablets for students to learn from. We'll equip these units to move between villages, communities, and refugee camps. The idea sounded ambitious, but it aligned perfectly with Elon's ethos of finding unconventional solutions to big problems. His team immediately got to work designing the mobile classrooms. They envisioned futuristic-looking vehicles that could house solar panels, satellite dishes, and technology that would allow teachers to engage with students remotely while also providing a space for independent learning. While the team worked on the mobile classrooms, another challenge was beginning to take shape. As the platform grew in popularity, it began attracting the attention of large corporations and educational institutions. Some saw the platform as an opportunity to create profitable partnerships, while others began to worry about the potential disruption to traditional educational models. In some cases, well-established education companies tried to challenge the platform's model, accusing it of undermining traditional teaching methods and putting teachers out of work. The scrutiny was intensifying, and Elon found himself constantly having to defend the platform. "We're not here to replace teachers," he insisted at a press conference. "We're here to support them. We want to provide every teacher with the tools they need to succeed in today's world. This platform doesn't make educators obsolete. It makes them more effective, more connected, and more powerful." But critics weren't convinced, and soon the media began to spread negative reports about the platform, questioning whether it could truly provide the kind of personalized, high-quality education that schools had traditionally offered. There were concerns about the platform's sustainability, its potential to exacerbate the digital divide, and its impact on local economies. Despite Elon's confidence, the pressure was mounting. As these debates raged on, another issue began to take shape, one that was far more personal. Elon, ever the visionary, had been so consumed by the mission that he had neglected his own well-being. Long hours, constant travel, and the stress of managing such an enormous initiative had taken a toll on him. His personal life was also beginning to unravel. His relationships with family and friends had become strained, and his emotional state was deteriorating. Late one night, Elon sat in his office, staring at the glowing screen of his computer. He had just received another barrage of critical messages from his team regarding the mobile classrooms project. Despite the excitement and support from many people, there were also concerns about whether they would be able to execute such a large-scale operation. He felt overwhelmed, and for the first time, he questioned whether they had bitten off more than they could chew. His thoughts were interrupted by a call from his sister, Tosca. "Elon, you've been working nonstop for weeks. You need to take a break. You're burning out." He leaned back in his chair, sighing heavily. "I don't have time for a break, Tosca. We're on the brink of something big. If we don't push forward now, we might lose momentum." Tosca's voice softened. "You're right that the mission is important, but you can't help anyone if you burn out. Your health matters too. You need to take care of yourself, or this whole thing will fall apart." Elon paused. He knew she was right. He had always pushed himself to the limit, often sacrificing his well-being for the sake of his companies and projects. But now, with everything on the line, he realized that without his health, none of it would matter. It was time to reassess, not just the platform's direction, but his own personal approach to leadership. Elon took a rare moment to reflect. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to consider his own limits. The mission had become a behemoth, and he couldn't carry it all on his shoulders. He needed to rely on his team, delegate, and perhaps, just perhaps, learn to take a step back when necessary. With renewed determination, Elon called his team the next morning. "We've hit some major obstacles, but we'll overcome them," he said, his voice clear and resolute. "The mobile classrooms are a step in the right direction, but we need to build a system that can scale without overwhelming us. We need to be smart, and we need to stay focused on the bigger picture." Despite the setbacks, Elon's resolve was stronger than ever. He knew the journey ahead would be difficult, but he was confident that with the right strategy and the unwavering support of his team, they would overcome these challenges. As the global platform grew, so did the pressure. Elon Musk had always thrived in high-stakes environments, but even he had to admit that things were getting complicated. His leadership, once seen as the key to success, was now being tested in ways he had never anticipated. The criticisms were louder, the technical problems more persistent, and the infrastructure challenges overwhelming. Despite these challenges, Elon remained determined to push forward, but something had changed in him. The stress was beginning to take its toll, not only on Elon but on his team as well. The endless days of problem-solving and troubleshooting had led to exhaustion, and the team's once unified energy was starting to fray. The mobile classroom project, despite its promise, faced a series of delays, and the platform's technical glitches were still causing setbacks in remote areas where connectivity was already unreliable. Elon, however, was used to finding opportunities even in the midst of adversity. After receiving yet another round of concerns from his engineering team about scaling the mobile classrooms, he decided to take a step back and reassess the situation from a new angle. Instead of continuing to drive forward with the same plan, he called for a company-wide meeting to get fresh perspectives on the problem. "I've been so focused on the big picture that I might have missed something important," Elon confessed to his team. "I need your input. What are we not seeing? What could we do differently?" The team, though weary, appreciated the transparency. They brainstormed new ideas, rethinking the very foundation of the platform's infrastructure. One engineer proposed a shift in strategy. Instead of continuing to push for mobile classrooms in every remote village, why not create a decentralized approach, utilizing local partners who could serve as hubs for remote learning? Elon's eyes lit up. This idea could provide the scalability they desperately needed. If we focus on empowering local communities, we could establish a network of learning hubs that don't require the massive overhead of mobile classrooms. These hubs would use the technology we've already developed, and local partners could maintain them, ensuring a more sustainable solution. The idea was a game changer. By turning to local partners, schools, NGOs, even tech startups, they could create a network of educational hubs that provided not only online lessons but also local mentorship and community support. These hubs could be equipped with basic technology and solar power, and the platform could be used to connect students with teachers around the world via virtual classrooms. This shift in focus allowed Elon and his team to rethink their approach. Instead of creating a top-down solution that required heavy investment in infrastructure, they could build a decentralized system that empowered local communities to take ownership of their educational futures. The platform could scale at a pace that was more aligned with the reality of each region, ensuring that no one was left behind while avoiding the pitfalls of overextending themselves. But there were still hurdles to overcome. The global reach of the platform was becoming a political issue in some countries, where government officials felt threatened by the idea of outside influences shaping their educational systems. Elon was no stranger to such resistance. He had faced opposition before when introducing disruptive technologies, but the stakes felt higher this time. "We're not trying to replace their systems," Elon explained in a meeting with international education ministers. "We're offering an additional layer, a supplement to their existing infrastructure. We're not here to disrupt. We're here to enable." Despite his persuasive arguments, some countries remained unconvinced. Elon's team faced bureaucratic red tape and political pushback in multiple regions, which delayed the platform's full deployment. Yet Elon knew that the key to overcoming this was not simply convincing governments, but showing them the tangible benefits of the platform. In regions where the platform had been deployed, the results were undeniable. In war-torn Syria, refugee children were learning alongside students in Europe and North America, bridging cultural divides through education. In rural parts of sub-Saharan Africa, students who had never had access to advanced science classes were now learning cutting-edge technology and mathematics. One of the platform's most surprising success stories came from a small village in Guatemala. There, a young girl named Isabel had taken it upon herself to become a community ambassador for the platform. Despite having limited resources, Isabel had used the platform's offline features to teach other children in her village. The results were extraordinary. Not only did the children improve academically, but their outlook on life shifted dramatically. They began to see education as a pathway to opportunity, and the village began to see a broader vision for its future. Isabel's story was picked up by international media, becoming a symbol of how education could transcend even the toughest of challenges. The story went viral, and soon, world leaders were calling Elon, asking for ways they could bring the platform to their countries. The momentum was building. But just as things were starting to turn around, Elon found himself facing a new set of challenges. As more governments came on board, so did larger corporations, eager to take a piece of the educational revolution. While this could provide the platform with more resources, it also posed a potential risk. Would the commercialization of the platform dilute its original mission? Elon had always been adamant about the platform's purpose: to offer free, accessible education to every child, no matter their background. He had fought against the notion that education should be commodified, but as corporate interests began to enter the picture, he found himself in an increasingly delicate balancing act. In a board meeting, Elon addressed the issue head-on. We need to stay true to our mission. Education is not a product to be sold, it's a right. We can't let profit-driven motives overshadow the core values that made this platform successful in the first place. There was silence in the room. Elon's words resonated deeply with the team, and they knew that the next steps would require careful strategy. They would need to find a way to incorporate resources from corporations without compromising their vision. This would involve renegotiating partnerships, setting clear boundaries, and staying vigilant in ensuring that the mission remained the priority. Despite these challenges, the team was reinvigorated. They had weathered the storm together, and now they could see the light at the end of the tunnel. The tipping point had arrived. They were no longer just a startup, they were a global movement, and the world was finally starting to realize the power of what they had built. As the platform expanded, the global movement began to shift from a singular mission to something far greater: a community. The platform was no longer just about providing education. It had become a symbol of hope and empowerment. Every success story, every breakthrough, every small victory added to the collective vision of a better, more connected world. But with this growth came new challenges, especially in managing the complex relationships between governments, corporations, local communities, and the platform's own mission. Elon Musk had always been a firm believer in the power of technology to bring about change. But as he reflected on the platform's evolution, he realized that the true power wasn't just in the technology itself, it was in the people. The stories of children learning to read in refugee camps, of entire communities coming together to teach one another, and of teachers using the platform to connect with students around the world filled him with pride. But the platform's success was about more than technology. It was about community engagement. It was about empowering individuals, families, and local leaders to take charge of their own educational futures. It was about breaking down barriers, not just in terms of access to education, but also in terms of cultural and social divides. In some countries, the platform had been met with resistance, especially from entrenched educational systems that were resistant to change. But over time, the tide had begun to shift. The platform's impact was undeniable. Where traditional education systems had failed to meet the needs of marginalized communities, the platform had flourished. And it wasn't just the students who benefited. Teachers had also found new ways to thrive in a rapidly changing world. For example, in Kenya, a group of teachers had formed a network to support one another and share resources through the platform. They created localized courses that addressed specific challenges faced by their students, and they found new ways to incorporate technology into their classrooms. The network became a model for other countries, showing that with the right tools and support, teachers could not only survive but excel in the digital age. Elon had always been about challenging the status quo, but he had never imagined that the most powerful force for change would come from the very people he sought to help. The platform had ignited a spark in individuals, driving them to take ownership of their own learning and to invest in the learning of others. One of the most moving examples of this was a group of women in rural India who had begun using the platform to educate themselves. These women, many of whom had never set foot in a formal classroom, started learning basic literacy and numeracy through the platform. Soon, they were teaching their children and even other women in their village. The ripple effect was profound. These women not only changed their own lives, but they began to change the lives of others, creating a cycle of education and empowerment that spread beyond their immediate community. Elon and his team had never fully anticipated the grassroots movement that had formed around their platform. What had started as a tool for global education had become a symbol of what was possible when people came together to challenge the systems that had traditionally held them back. The results were undeniable. Across the globe, from the deserts of the Middle East to the jungles of South America, communities were coming together to make education accessible for all. And while many of these communities were still facing tremendous challenges, poverty, lack of infrastructure, and political instability, there was a growing sense of optimism. The idea that education could be a universal right, rather than a privilege, was gaining traction. Yet, as the movement grew, so did the complications. The rapid expansion had started to create divisions among the many stakeholders involved. Governments were scrambling to keep up with the growing demand for resources, and some began to worry that the platform was operating outside their control. Corporations, too, were keen to capitalize on the platform's success, but they had different ideas about how to shape its future. Elon found himself at the center of a complex web of negotiations, each one more difficult than the last. While many governments were excited to support the platform, others saw it as a challenge to their power. Some feared the idea of free education for all, believing that it could disrupt the status quo and undermine traditional power structures. Corporate interests, too, were complicating things. While some companies wanted to help fund the platform and expand its reach, others had commercial agendas that seemed at odds with the platform's mission. Elon's constant challenge was to ensure that the platform remained focused on its core values: accessibility, equality, and the belief that education should not be a commodity. One evening, as Elon sat alone in his office, he couldn't help but reflect on the magnitude of what they had built. The global movement was no longer just about education. It had become a fight for equality, for access, for the future of humanity. But as with any great movement, the question remained: could it be sustained? Could it truly change the world? Just then, Elon's phone rang. It was Tosca. "Elon, we need to talk," she said, her tone serious. "I know," he replied, running a hand through his hair. "The world is changing, Tosca, but so are we. You've created something incredible," she said softly. "But don't lose sight of what's important. This isn't just about the numbers or the technology. It's about people. It's always been about people." Elon paused. Her words hit him harder than he expected. It was true. Everything they had done, every obstacle they had overcome, every success they had celebrated, it had all been about the people they had helped along the way. "I'll remember that," he said, finally feeling the weight of the journey. "We've got to keep the focus on the people. Everything else will follow." And with that realization, Elon knew that despite the challenges ahead, they had created something that was bigger than any of them, a movement that had the potential to change the world. The momentum was undeniable. As Elon Musk watched the global platform continue to grow, he felt both pride and anxiety, a strange mix of accomplishment and the recognition that the journey was far from over. But what lay ahead was uncharted territory. The platform was no longer just a startup, no longer just a revolutionary idea. It had become a beacon of hope for millions, a symbol of what was possible when technology was harnessed for the greater good. Yet, with success came the inevitable question: how could they sustain this momentum? How could they ensure that the platform didn't simply become another casualty of overexpansion or corporate greed? Elon often found himself alone in his thoughts, wondering if there was a way to balance the ideals that had driven the platform's creation with the reality of the growing demands and interests that came with its success. The more people used the platform, the more pressure there was to scale it faster. And with that pressure came the temptation to compromise, to take shortcuts in areas that mattered most. The global landscape was also shifting in ways that could impact the platform. Governments in more developed nations were beginning to embrace digital learning tools, but in some parts of the world, the idea of free, accessible education for all was still seen as a threat to traditional power structures. In places where access to information had been tightly controlled for years, the platform's rapid growth was causing unease. One night, after a long day of meetings with international leaders, Elon sat at his desk, reflecting on a conversation he had earlier with a government official from a developing country. The official had been polite, but their concern had been clear. "You can't just come into our country and dictate how we educate our children," they had said. "Education is a national matter. It must be tailored to our culture, our needs." Elon had understood the sentiment. It was one he had encountered before, but the world had changed. Education was no longer a privilege. It was a universal right. Yet, the challenge remained: how to build a system that could be adapted to various cultural and political landscapes while maintaining the integrity of the mission. His phone buzzed, breaking his train of thought. It was a message from Tosca. "Can we meet tomorrow?" I have something important to discuss, it read. Elon set the phone down, his mind already racing. Tosca had always been a trusted confidant, someone who understood both the technical side of things and the bigger picture. If she wanted to talk, it was likely something big. The next morning, they met in the conference room, their usual spot for serious conversations. Elon, I think it's time we rethink the core model, Tosca began, her expression serious. We've built something incredible, but as it expands, I'm starting to see cracks in the system. The technology is great, but we're becoming too focused on the infrastructure. We're losing sight of the human element, the community aspect that made this all possible in the first place. Elon nodded slowly, absorbing her words. He had seen the same issues creeping in. They had created a massive, scalable system, but had they sacrificed the personal touch that had made the platform so powerful? Could the platform still be the driving force of change if it became just another corporate-run tool? We need to scale it, sure, Tosca continued, but not at the expense of the very thing that has made this platform work. What if we could create smaller, more localized networks that work within the existing educational frameworks in each country? Think of it like a community-based model, but with our technology as a backbone. Elon thought for a moment. The idea was bold, but it made sense. The goal had always been to empower local communities, not impose a one-size-fits-all solution. If they could find a way to integrate the platform into each country's unique educational system, while still maintaining the integrity of their mission, they could reach even more students. But how do we make sure that this doesn't turn into a patchwork of disconnected initiatives? Elon asked. That's where the community-driven approach comes in, Tosca replied. We let local leaders, teachers, activists, NGOs, take the lead. They understand the needs of their communities better than anyone. We just provide the tools, the resources, and the support. The platform becomes a vehicle for their ideas, not the other way around. Elon smiled, feeling the spark of inspiration he'd been missing for weeks. This was the direction they needed to go. The future of the platform wasn't about scaling up faster. It was about scaling smarter. Over the next few weeks, the team worked tirelessly to develop this new model. They started pilot programs in several countries, partnering with local organizations to create educational hubs that were tailored to the specific needs of each community. The idea was simple. Let the technology do the heavy lifting, but let the people drive the vision. The results were nothing short of transformative. In Colombia, a group of local teachers had taken the platform's resources and adapted them to teach rural children about the region's history, integrating the local culture and language into the lessons. In India, a network of women's cooperatives used the platform to offer digital literacy classes to marginalized women, opening doors to new opportunities and social mobility. But the true test came when the platform launched in one of the most challenging regions on Earth, Syria. Despite the ongoing civil war, the team managed to set up mobile classrooms in refugee camps, offering access to education for children who had been out of school for years. These children, many of whom had lost their families and homes, were now given a chance to dream again. Elon visited the refugee camps himself, wanting to see firsthand the impact of the platform. What he saw there moved him more than anything he had experienced in his career. Children, many of whom had been living in tents for years, sat eagerly in front of screens, learning math, science, and even English. The smile on their faces as they connected with teachers from across the world was a powerful reminder of why he had started this journey in the first place. In the midst of the chaos and suffering, Elon realized something profound. They weren't just building a platform, they were creating a movement that transcended borders, languages, and political divides. Education had become the great equalizer, and the platform was the tool that would help level the playing field for millions of children who had never had a chance. But the road ahead was far from certain. Elon knew that the future would present new challenges, more resistance, more logistical nightmares, and more opposition from those who saw the platform as a threat. Yet, in that moment, he was more determined than ever. The road less traveled was always the hardest, but it was also the most rewarding. The journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. As the platform continued to make strides globally, the challenges began to multiply in ways Elon Musk had not anticipated. Despite the groundbreaking success of the community-driven model, there were significant obstacles looming on the horizon. Success had come with a price, one that threatened to undo much of the work they had done so far. The first of these obstacles was financial. The global scale of the initiative had caused unexpected costs to rise. Although Elon's original vision had been for the platform to remain free for all, the operational expenses for maintaining servers, hiring staff, and providing ongoing support had grown exponentially. The pressure to generate revenue was mounting, and traditional methods of monetizing the platform were being pushed forward, something Elon had always been reluctant to consider. Meanwhile, some countries began to push back against the platform's influence in their educational systems. Governments that had initially welcomed the idea of digital learning as a solution to their underfunded public education systems started to view the platform with suspicion. In several regions, leaders who were once supportive of the project were now hesitant, fearing the loss of control over their own education systems. They worried that the platform was undermining local traditions and values, and some even accused the platform of trying to impose Western ideals on their populations. In countries like Russia and China, government officials were particularly wary of the growing influence of a platform that operated outside their borders. They saw it as a challenge to their centralized control over education and information. In China, there was even a government crackdown on foreign-run educational initiatives, including the platform, citing national security concerns. This wave of opposition was not just political, it was economic. Some powerful industries in both the tech and education sectors saw the platform's success as a direct threat to their profitability. Traditional textbook publishers, educational consultants, and private school chains started lobbying against the platform, using their influence to rally against what they saw as the disruptive force that could render their services obsolete. It wasn't just about politics, it was also about control. The platform had become a powerful tool for democratizing education, but in doing so, it had also made a lot of powerful people uncomfortable. They didn't like the idea of an educational revolution that was outside their control. In the midst of these challenges, Elon had to make some difficult decisions. The pressure was mounting on every front: financial, political, and personal. He could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. What started as a bold experiment to make education accessible to everyone was now tangled in a web of resistance, funding issues, and competing interests. But he wasn't one to back down. Elon had always been a fighter, and he had weathered storms before. He knew that the key to overcoming these obstacles lay not in giving in to pressure, but in doubling down on their original mission, to provide universal access to education. Tosca, as always, was a rock in the storm. "Elon," she said one evening over a video call, "we knew this wouldn't be easy. The challenges are real, but so is the potential to change the world. We just have to find a way to pivot, to adapt." Elon was quiet for a long moment, staring out of the window of his office. The sun was setting over the city, casting an orange glow over everything. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to reflect on the journey so far, the triumphs, the struggles, and the incredible people they had met along the way. He had no intention of letting that go to waste. "I think you're right," Elon finally said. "We need to adapt, but we also need to stay true to what we stand for. We can't compromise on our mission, even if it means making some difficult choices." Tosca nodded. "We'll find a way. Maybe it's time to focus on smaller, more sustainable projects, things that can grow organically within local systems. We can still make a massive impact, just in a different way." Elon thought about this for a moment. Maybe Tosca was right. Rather than trying to force the platform into every corner of the world, they could focus on areas where it was most needed, where it could have the greatest impact. They could scale back on their ambitions, at least temporarily, and focus on making sure that the communities they had already reached were thriving before pushing further. He looked up, his expression hardening with resolve. "We're going to take this one step at a time. We've come too far to give up now." As the days went on, Elon and his team began to adjust their strategy. They scaled back some of their operations in certain regions, focusing on partnerships with local governments and NGOs that could help guide the platform's implementation in a way that respected local needs and values. They also began to work more closely with the platform's community of teachers and activists, empowering them to take on a larger role in shaping the direction of the platform. Through these changes, they hoped to maintain the platform's core principles of accessibility and empowerment while also addressing the political and financial realities of the situation. It wasn't going to be easy, but Elon was determined to see it through. Then, an unexpected opportunity arose. Elon was approached by a major philanthropic organization that had been following the platform's progress. They offered to partner with Elon and his team, providing financial support to help overcome the platform's funding challenges. This partnership could allow the platform to remain free for users while providing the resources necessary to expand and improve the infrastructure. It was an offer that Elon knew could change everything. However, he couldn't help but wonder, would accepting this help mean compromising on the platform's mission? Would it shift the balance of power away from the community-driven model he had worked so hard to build? As he sat in his office, contemplating the decision, he thought back to the moment when he first had the idea for the platform. It had been about more than just technology or education. It had been about freedom. Freedom from systems that controlled access to knowledge, freedom from inequality, freedom to learn and grow. In the end, Elon knew that the platform's true strength came from its ability to inspire people. Whether it was a child in a refugee camp, a teacher in Kenya, or a community leader in Colombia, it was the people who made the platform what it was. And no matter how many obstacles came their way, no matter how many powerful forces tried to derail them, Elon would never give up on that vision. The journey was far from over, but he was ready for whatever came next. The meeting with the philanthropic organization loomed over Elon like a cloud. He had spent the past few days mulling over the offer, weighing the pros and cons. The funding would ease many of the platform's growing pains. It would ensure that the mission could continue at the pace it was growing, helping millions of students around the world. But there was one thing that nagged at him. Accepting this offer could change the entire trajectory of the platform. It could take them down a path he was not sure they were ready for. Elon had always operated on a principle: build something of lasting value, something that would empower people to change their lives on their terms. The moment he accepted outside help, the question lingered. Would they still be able to maintain their independence and mission? Or would they fall into the trap of corporate influence and compromise their core values? As he sat at his desk that morning, staring out at the city below, Elon reflected on the idea that had driven him from the start: the democratization of knowledge. His goal had never been to make a profit. It had never been about dominating a market or competing with other tech giants. It had always been about creating a platform that allowed anyone, anywhere, to learn, to grow, and to reach their potential. But the reality was that scaling a global initiative required more than just good intentions. It required infrastructure, financial backing, and sustainability. The funding from the philanthropic organization would cover a lot of ground, especially in terms of server capacity, outreach programs, and the development of localized content tailored to different countries and cultures. It could be the lifeline the platform needed to survive in the long term. Yet, there was something about accepting such an offer that felt like a concession. It was not that Elon was opposed to philanthropy, but he had seen firsthand how corporate interests could influence the direction of a project. He had spent years fighting against corporate monopolies, advocating for transparency and freedom. Could this partnership, even with good intentions, end up turning the platform into another tool for big money and influence? He wasn't the only one struggling with the decision. Tosca had her own reservations. After all, she had been one of the loudest voices advocating for the community-driven model, emphasizing that the platform's strength lay in its grassroots connections. If they accepted the funding, would they lose that element? Would they become just another tech company, subject to the whims of investors and stakeholders more interested in ROI than in the platform's mission? They decided to meet and talk it through. They needed clarity before making such a monumental decision. The next day, Elon and Tosca sat in the conference room, the tension between them palpable. Elon spoke first. "Tosca, I've been thinking a lot about the offer. It could change everything for us. The funding would give us the freedom to expand, to improve the platform's infrastructure, to do so much more than we've been able to do so far. But at the same time, I can't help but feel like it could undermine what we've built. It could change our vision, shift the power dynamics, and take us away from our roots." Tosca nodded thoughtfully. "I hear you, Elon. The offer is tempting, but I share your concerns. What makes this platform different is the authenticity of its mission. It's not about selling a product or generating profits. It's about giving people access to education. The moment we bring in outside money, we're accountable to someone else. We risk losing sight of what really matters. There was silence between them as they both thought about what this decision meant. They had always been an unconventional team. They had always moved with purpose, but had never followed the traditional rules of business. That's what had allowed them to create something unique. It was that freedom that made their platform stand out. They had been able to break away from the traditional corporate model, giving them the ability to act without restrictions. Elon leaned back in his chair, his fingers rubbing his temples. I've been thinking about what this platform represents. It's not just technology. It's about creating real change, real opportunities for people who have been left behind. We've always been about breaking barriers and fighting against the status quo. But if we accept this funding, we risk becoming just another cog in the system. I don't want to lose that. Tosca looked at him, her eyes sharp and focused. I agree. We can't lose sight of why we started this. But we also have to recognize that we can't do this alone. The resources we need are massive. If we want to truly make an impact, we need a plan for sustainability. We need to think about how we grow, how we scale, and how we build something that lasts. That doesn't mean compromising on our mission. It just means finding new ways to keep the integrity of our vision while securing the resources we need. Elon nodded slowly, appreciating Tosca's balanced perspective. She wasn't suggesting abandoning their ideals. She was suggesting they find a way to stay true to their purpose while ensuring the platform's future. And that, he realized, was what they needed to do. We don't have to accept the money on their terms, Elon said, a glint of determination in his eyes. What if we could negotiate the deal to align with our values? What if we could secure the funding while maintaining full control of the platform? We can make sure that the mission stays at the center of everything we do. Tosca smiled, her expression lightening. That's the spirit, Elon. We don't have to compromise. We just need to be smart about it. We can take their support, but we need to make sure we remain the stewards of the platform, not beholden to anyone else. The more they talked, the clearer their path became. They would accept the offer, but with strict conditions. The philanthropic organization would provide the necessary funding, but they would not have a say in the platform's day-to-day operations or its mission. They would act as partners, supporting the platform's growth, but never steering its direction. Elon and Tosca spent the next several weeks negotiating the terms, ensuring that their values would remain at the forefront. They crafted a plan that would allow the platform to expand without losing the very essence of what made it special. As the agreement was finalized, Elon felt a sense of relief mixed with a renewed sense of purpose. The platform was on the verge of something even bigger, and this partnership, done on their terms, could give them the fuel they needed to continue their journey. The road ahead was still full of challenges, but Elon felt more prepared than ever. They had made it this far because they had refused to follow the conventional path, and now, they had the opportunity to keep pushing forward while staying true to their mission. The world needed this platform more than ever. The next chapter of their journey was about to begin. With the agreement finalized and the funding secured, Elon and Tosca set their sights on the future. The platform's expansion was no longer just a distant dream. It was happening now. The pressure was on, but so was the excitement. They had managed to keep the essence of their mission intact while ensuring they had the resources needed to support the rapid growth ahead. The first step was to bolster their team. As the platform grew, so too did the demand for talented individuals who could help execute the vision. Elon and Tosca had always prided themselves on working with passionate, like-minded people who believed in the cause, and now they needed to build a team that could carry their vision across the globe. They began by hiring a core group of strategic advisors, specialists in education, tech infrastructure, and global expansion. Elon was careful not to let anyone sway the platform's vision, and he ensured that the team understood one thing above all else. The platform was here to empower individuals, not corporations. It was about creating an ecosystem where knowledge was free, accessible, and organic. The next challenge was scaling the platform to meet the demand. While the original design had been highly successful, it was clear that new features, better localization, and improved user experience were critical to accommodate a growing and diverse global audience. The engineers worked tirelessly to ensure the platform could handle millions of new users without losing the intimacy that had made it so special. One of the most crucial changes was to focus on improving the platform's accessibility. As the team reviewed user feedback from different regions, it became apparent that some areas needed more than just translated content. They needed culturally specific curricula that resonated with local customs and traditions. This was no longer a one-size-fits-all platform. It was becoming a tool that could adapt to every corner of the world, empowering people no matter where they lived. Elon's vision was beginning to take shape, but there was a constant challenge, ensuring that the platform remained true to its educational roots. As they began negotiations with governments in various countries, Elon was reminded of the delicate balance between growth and integrity. Some governments, particularly in developing nations, had expressed interest in adopting the platform on a national scale, while others remained cautious, worried about the potential loss of local control over education. Tosca, ever the pragmatist, had advised caution. We have to approach these negotiations carefully. We can't just give away control of what we've built. If we're not careful, we could lose what makes this unique. Elon agreed. He had spent too many years battling against systems of control to let the platform become just another cog in a government machine. They needed to find partners who understood the platform's mission and who would support its growth while respecting the autonomy of the local communities using it. The platform's first large-scale partnership came with a government in sub-Saharan Africa, where access to education was one of the most pressing challenges. The agreement would allow the platform to work alongside local governments to provide free education to millions of students in rural areas who previously had no access to formal schooling. However, there were terms that allowed the platform to maintain its independence, ensuring that the content would remain community-driven and that the platform would not be controlled by any political entity. Elon was excited about the partnership, but he also knew the risks. Governments, even well-intentioned ones, could exert pressure in ways that would alter the platform's operations. He understood that the platform's survival depended not just on its technological success, but on its ability to navigate these complex political landscapes while staying true to its mission. In addition to these government partnerships, the platform was gaining traction among private organizations and NGOs. Many of them saw the value in the platform's approach to education, and they wanted to be part of the movement. Elon and Tosca carefully vetted these partnerships, always asking the same questions. Would they help further the mission, or would they dilute it for the sake of profit? One such partnership was with a global nonprofit focused on environmental sustainability. The organization was interested in using the platform to educate young people about climate change and environmental stewardship. Elon was hesitant at first, knowing that the platform had to remain focused on general education. But after several meetings, they found common ground. They would create a new module on environmental education, one that would allow young people to explore these issues in ways that were accessible, practical, and engaging. This was a perfect example of how the platform could expand its content without losing its integrity. As the platform expanded and reached more students, the stories of its impact grew. Teachers in remote villages were sharing how the platform had transformed their classrooms, providing tools and resources they never thought possible. Students in refugee camps were telling their stories of learning, growing, and becoming leaders in their communities. Entrepreneurs were using the platform to learn new skills and start businesses that would help lift their families and communities out of poverty. But even as the success stories piled up, Elon and Tosca knew they were facing a new set of challenges. The pressure to scale had never been greater, and with scale came increased scrutiny. The platform was no longer just a small initiative. It was a global force with the potential to reshape the educational landscape. For Elon, it was a strange feeling. He had started this project with a single, simple goal: to make education accessible to anyone who wanted it. Now, as the platform spread across continents, he was forced to confront the implications of its success. Could they continue to grow without losing sight of their roots? Could they remain an authentic, community-driven movement while operating at a global scale? Tosca's voice came through clearly as she often reminded him, "Elon, we have to remember that the platform is bigger than any one of us. It's not about our vision anymore. It's about the collective vision of the millions of people using it. Our job is to listen, to adapt, and to stay true to the values that got us here." Elon took her words to heart. The journey was only beginning, and the road ahead was filled with both promise and uncertainty. But one thing was clear: The platform was ready for the next stage of its evolution. The possibilities were endless, and the future was bright. Elon couldn't wait to see where the journey would take them next. As the platform's influence continued to grow, so did the challenges. The success they had achieved so far came at a price. The more they expanded, the more they had to contend with the complications of scaling a global initiative. The platform that had started with such pure intentions, creating an accessible space for learning, was beginning to feel the weight of its success. The more people that joined, the more opinions, expectations, and demands grew. Elon and Tosca knew they had to handle this carefully. The pressure was becoming suffocating. There were moments when Elon would sit at his desk late at night, thinking about the future, wondering if they were still on the right track. Every decision seemed to carry immense consequences. One of the most pressing concerns was the increasing influence of corporate partners. While the philanthropic funding had allowed them to expand, Elon had been careful to ensure that they did not compromise their mission. However, as the platform grew, corporations and influential players in the tech world had started knocking on their door, offering partnerships, investments, and sponsorships. The money was tempting, but Elon could feel the shift. These organizations wanted control over the platform's content, its direction, its users. It was a power struggle that he had always dreaded. Tosca, ever the pragmatist, had been pushing Elon to take a more cautious approach when it came to corporate partnerships. She was the first to warn him of the dangers of being beholden to powerful entities that didn't share their ideals. But even she couldn't ignore the reality. Their financial and operational needs were growing faster than expected. They couldn't continue without additional resources. The constant balancing act between staying true to their mission and meeting the demands of corporate sponsors was exhausting, and they both knew it was only a matter of time before they had to make a difficult choice. The tipping point came when one of the largest tech giants in the world, a company Elon had once respected, made a bold offer, a massive investment in exchange for a significant say in the platform's direction. It was an offer that would give them the financial freedom to expand even further, but it would also shift the balance of power. Elon knew that if they accepted, it would mean giving up a part of what they had worked so hard to build. It was a dilemma unlike any other they had faced. Tosca, after reading through the terms of the offer, couldn't contain her frustration. Elon, they're trying to take over. This isn't just an investment. It's a takeover disguised as a partnership. They want control. They want to use the platform for their own agenda. And if we let them in, it won't be just our mission at stake. It'll be the future of this entire project. Elon stared at the papers, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. This was a moment of reckoning. The very essence of the platform was at risk. How could they maintain their integrity in the face of such overwhelming pressure? The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and sleepless nights. Elon and Tosca convened with their most trusted advisors, including the community leaders who had supported them from the beginning. Everyone had an opinion, but the core sentiment was the same. They couldn't allow their platform to be co-opted by corporate interests. However, the more they discussed, the more it became clear that they were facing a new reality. They couldn't afford to remain entirely independent if they wanted to continue to grow. The world was changing, and so was the landscape of education. If they didn't play by the rules of the new corporate world, they risked being left behind. After much deliberation, Elon and Tosca arrived at a decision. They would not accept the deal with the tech giant, not without securing terms that would allow them to maintain control. They would negotiate, but they would not compromise their values. If they couldn't find a way to work with corporations without losing their mission, then they would scale down and continue on their own. It was a risky move, but one they believed in. The negotiations were intense. Elon and Tosca went back and forth with the tech giant, making it clear that they were not interested in simply taking the money and losing their autonomy. They fought for their vision, arguing that the platform's strength lay in its ability to remain independent and focused on its mission, not just profit margins. It took weeks of back-and-forth negotiations, but finally, they reached a deal that they felt was fair. The tech giant agreed to a smaller, non-controlling stake in the platform and would not interfere with its content or mission. It was a compromise that allowed them to secure the financial backing they needed without sacrificing their core values. Elon and Tosca emerged from the negotiation table exhausted but relieved. The platform was now secure, and they had kept their independence. But the experience had changed them. They realized that maintaining the purity of their mission would always be a battle, one that they would have to fight every step of the way. As the days passed, the weight of the decision began to sink in. The platform had grown beyond their wildest dreams, but with that growth came new challenges, challenges they had never imagined. The road ahead was more uncertain than ever, but Elon and Tosca were resolute. They would continue to fight for the vision they had created, no matter the cost. As the platform moved forward, it became clear that they were not just battling the external forces of corporations and governments. They were battling the internal forces of compromise and temptation. It was a fight they had to win, not just for the platform, but for every student, every teacher, and every person who relied on it. The storm of negotiations, corporate offers, and global scaling had subsided, leaving a moment of quiet reflection for Elon and Tosca. They had made it through the worst of the external pressure and had managed to keep their platform on track, preserving its integrity while also securing the resources it needed to thrive. Yet, as the dust settled, they both felt a growing sense of unease. Despite their success, there was a new challenge looming: how to secure the long-term sustainability of the platform without losing sight of what had made it so special in the first place. For Elon, the most pressing question wasn't about the financials or the market share. It was about the people. The platform had become a tool for millions around the world, a space where students could learn and grow regardless of their background. The voices of teachers, students, and communities were stronger than ever, but Elon couldn't help but wonder how long they could keep that authentic connection alive as the platform continued to scale. Tosca had been more optimistic. She had watched as the platform transformed the lives of countless individuals, many of whom had never before had access to quality education. Every success story reminded her why they had started this journey in the first place. But even she could see the writing on the wall. They were at a crossroads, and the next steps they took would define the future of the platform and their own legacies. A few months after the final corporate negotiation, Elon and Tosca were invited to a global summit on educational reform. It was a prestigious event, one where the world's top thinkers, educators, and innovators gathered to discuss the future of learning. Elon had never been one to enjoy the spotlight, but this was different. This was a chance to talk about the platform on a global stage, to share their journey, and perhaps more importantly, to confront the future of education head-on. As they prepared for the summit, Elon found himself reflecting on everything that had brought them to this moment. He thought back to the early days, the sleepless nights, the arguments with developers, the struggles to find investors who believed in their mission. It had been a long, difficult road, but now they were at the forefront of a global movement. It wasn't just about technology anymore. It was about revolutionizing the way the world thought about education. The summit itself was a whirlwind. Elon and Tosca presented their vision for the future of education, one where access to knowledge was a universal right, not a privilege. They spoke passionately about their platform's mission to provide free, high-quality education to every person on the planet. The audience was captivated by their story and their commitment to democratizing learning, but as the session came to a close, Elon couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He had heard the questions from the audience, questions about scalability, about sustainability, and about how they plan to maintain the integrity of the platform in the face of growing corporate and governmental pressure. When the event concluded, Elon and Tosca found themselves standing alone on a balcony, looking out over the city. The weight of the summit and the weight of the future hung heavily on their shoulders. "We've come so far, haven't we?" Tosca said, breaking the silence. Elon nodded. "Yeah, but I can't help but feel like we're just getting started. There's still so much to do." Tosca smiled, but her eyes showed the same concern Elon had been feeling. "It's not just about the next step, though, is it? It's about the bigger picture. We've created something that's changing lives, but can we keep it that way? Can we really maintain this level of authenticity and impact as we grow?" Elon took a deep breath. He had been wrestling with that same question for months. The path ahead was murky, filled with unknowns and potential compromises. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that there was one thing they had that no one else did: each other. "I think we can," he said. "But we have to stay true to why we started this in the first place." We have to keep the community at the center of everything we do. Tosca nodded. And that means staying independent, even when it gets hard. We can't let the money or the partnerships dictate our choices. Elon smiled. Yeah, we've come too far to let it slip away. It was then that Elon realized the true scale of their success. It wasn't about the money, the fame, or even the global recognition. It was about the change they had sparked in the world. How millions of people now had access to the tools that could change their lives. They had become more than just a platform. They had become a movement. But with that realization came the weight of responsibility. The platform had become a beacon of hope for millions, but it was still fragile. They had to protect it, nurture it, and make sure it never lost sight of the values that had made it so powerful. The days that followed were filled with reflection. Elon and Tosca knew that the road ahead would not be easy. They would face new challenges, technological, political, and financial, that would test their resolve. But they also knew that they had the strength and the vision to overcome anything. They had built something extraordinary, and they would continue to do so, no matter the obstacles. As the years passed, the platform grew stronger, becoming an integral part of the global educational ecosystem. It was no longer just a dream. It was a reality. And with that reality came a deeper understanding of their mission. It wasn't just about providing education. It was about empowering people to take control of their futures, no matter where they came from or what challenges they faced. And so, Elon and Tosca's journey continued. They had tested the boundaries of what was possible, and they had succeeded. But the true test, they realized, was not just in building something great. It was in ensuring that greatness was sustainable for generations to come. The legacy they had started was just beginning, and the best was yet to come. What do you think Elon and Tosca's legacy will be? Do you think they will be able to maintain their platform's integrity as it continues to grow? Or will they face challenges that threaten their mission? Share your thoughts in the comments below.